Okay, welcome everybody. Thank you very much for attending this meeting of Strategy and Resources Policy Committee. The meeting is open to the public today, and really pleased that members of the public have joined us today. Welcome. There's no items that contain exempt information. The meeting is being webcast and could be made available later to watch via Sheffield Live TV, and it will be available to watch via the Council's website. We've got a number of questions today from members of the public, and we'll come to them in item 5. Could I just ask that everyone switches phones and other devices off, as if right on cue? We could just switch them off so as not to disturb the meeting. There is no fire test planned for today, but if there is an emergency evacuation, the alarm will go off and we'll follow Town Hall staff to the safe place of assembly. I'll now ask the members of the committee to introduce themselves, and then ask officers here to introduce themselves as well. So, my name is Tom Hunt. I'm Chair of the Strategy and Resources Committee, and I'm Leader of the Council. And we'll go this way on my left.
Councillor Angela Argento, Member for Burngreave and Sheffield, and Chair of the Adult Health and Social Care Policy Committee.
Thanks, Douglas Johnson, Chair of Housing.
Good afternoon, everybody. So here and now is Councillor for the Darnell Ward and Chair of the Finance Committee.
Mark Jones, substituting for Dorndale.
Fran Melbourne, Councillor for Firth Park Ward and Deputy Leader of the Council.
Ben Miskell, Councillor for Park and Alberthorne Ward and Chair of Transport, Regeneration and Climate.
Charlton, Councillor for Dawn Totley and Chair of Waste and Street Scene.
Penny Baker, Councillor for Stannington and Vice Chair of Housing.
Martin Smith, I'm Councillor for Dawn Totley and Chair of the Economic Development, Skills and Culture Committee.
Richard Williams, Member for Stannington Ward and Chair of the Communities, Parks and Leisure Policy Committee.
Good afternoon, my name's Diane Hurst. I'm an elected member for Richmond Ward and here as the group spokesperson and leader of the Sheffield Community Councillors Group.
Thank you very much, everybody. I'll now ask the officers who are here today to introduce themselves, and I'll start on my left with Meredith.
Hello, Meredith Teasdale. I'm Strategic Director for Children's Services.
Greg Fell, Director of Public Health and Integrated Commissioning.
James Henderson, Director of Policy and Democratic Engagement.
Kate Josephs, Chief Executive.
David Hollis, General Counsel.
Craig Rogerson, Democratic Services.
Philip Gregory, Director of Finance and Commercial Services.
Kate Martin, Exec Director, City Futures.
Thank you very much, everybody. So we've got apologies from Councillor Dorndale, as Councillor Jones mentioned, and Councillor Jones is substituting for Dorndale. We've got apologies from Councillor Shafat Mohammed as well. As I mentioned, there's no items that contain exempt information today on the agenda. Item 3, declarations of interest. Are there any members who wish to declare an interest in any items of the business on the agenda today? No. Okay, thank you very much. Item 4 is the minutes of the previous meeting, and we're being asked today to approve as a correct record the minutes of the meeting that were held on the 24th of January. Can I ask, are people happy to approve those minutes? Thank you very much indeed. So, item number 5, public questions and petitions. We've received 9 questions from members of the public. There's half an hour in our agenda for public questions, and given the high number today, we'll ask questioners to be concise in their comments, and we're going to do sort of a first block of questions which are all around one subject, and then we'll invite the other questioners to come up. So, the first questioners, Miss Mishanth Feinstein, Elisa Rosina Allen Thompson and Ekram Ali, Lois Cole, Ronnie Lewin, and then there's another question from somebody called Helen on the same subject, but Helen's not attending today, but I think Elisa is going to ask that question. Brilliant. Could I ask those members of the public to come up and take seats at the front here, so we can then you can ask those questions, and then I can give a response to all of them together. Thank you very much indeed. Just wait a second. Okay. The first question is from Ms. Shannon. Could you just press the right-hand button on the microphone, and then everyone will be able to hear you. There we go.
Okay, thank you. I'll be asking this question on Ms. Shant's behalf. Since September, Acorn Burngreave members have been running our Take Back Vestry Hall campaign. We are unhappy with the fact that Vestry Hall, given its fantastic location and facilities, remains massively underused, especially given the desperate need for more community facilities in our area. Following a number of community meetings, we have identified two main reasons for Vestry Hall's massive underuse: the high price of room booking and the lack of any community outreach or involvement to ensure it is filled. We believe Vestry Hall could and should be a community hub for Burngreave, instead of a near-empty husk, which at the moment is best known in the area as a feeding place for pigeons. Given it is the councillors on the Strategy and Resources Committee that set the room booking policy and charges for Vestry Hall, will the committee chair meet with us to discuss our proposal on how we can turn around Vestry Hall, ensuring it is used by community groups and that it becomes a community hub our area needs?
Thank you very much indeed. The second question from Elisa and Ekram.
Okay, so my name is Elisa. Ekram unfortunately couldn't be here today, but I resubmit this question together. So Ekram and I run a new community group in Burngreave and Pittsmore called Clean Zone Community Network. We offer signposting, benefits help, activities such as cultural crafts, healthy eating advice for the people with or at risk of type 2 diabetes, physical activities such as walking and running, and we encourage litter picking and environmental work and provide litter picking equipment for our members to take part in these activities. Currently, we have no income, and all our resources, including food for each week we provide as part of our healthy eating education, has been paid from our own bank accounts. We are in the process of looking for funding and networking, hosting with other local charities. However, we need a central space to hold our drop-in. We currently use Abbeyfield House. However, this is not central enough. It doesn't have any disability access, and it's actually quite a rundown building as well, although friends of Abbeyfield House do the best that they can with it. A room at Vestry Hall would be ideal. However, due to the cost of Vestry Hall, we are unable to offer our service to the community in this area. So for £4, the cost would be £70, or in some cases, depending on security and cleaning fees, even more. We are aware of a discount for community groups. We did apply for this in November, but this has not been so far awarded, and we haven't really heard much about this. Vestry Hall is chronically underused. For instance, in the months of September and October, the main hall was unused 86% of the time. Does the council agree that the high price of booking is making it nearly impossible for community groups to use for what is meant to be a community building? Vestry Hall would be a fantastic location for our drop-in, which runs every Friday from 10 till 4. We are also hoping to hold an event around Ramadan and Eid, possibly at the end of the month, which would be open to all ages, of every ethnic, cultural and religious background, to provide food for the community and offer an opportunity for social cohesion. Holding an event such as this at an essential location such as Vestry Hall would be vital for this, as easier to access, central, good transport links and disabled access. Finally, Ekram and I are both healthcare workers with over 20 years' experience between us. Ekram is a senior support worker and I am a qualified psychiatric nurse. We understand the complexity of social and mental health issues in north of Sheffield and have excellent links with the community, having lived and worked here for many years. We feel we can offer our community some vitally needed support if we are offered the appropriate funding and the use of Vestry Hall. Our question is, what can the council do to enable groups like ours to run free of charge from Vestry Hall, which is a prime location, for the long term, given our group is likely to have a significant impact on many of the social and environmental issues Burngreave faces, and will help improve the lives of some of the most vulnerable and socially excluded people in our local community?
Thank you very much indeed. And the third question on this same subject is from Lois Cole.
So my question really is, when are you going to fulfil your obligations as Sheffield Council to the residents of Burngreave? As you know, it's the second most deprived area in Sheffield, yet we don't even have a proper library. As a local resident, I struggle to access any help with benefits, consumer advice and help with job hunting since the local CAB office and shut down several years ago. There is nowhere safe and welcoming where local residents can mix and meet and get involved in local activities. And this is why we need to make Vestry Hall a community hub. And I just want to read out a quote from you. We know how important it is for local residents to have access to quality community centres and services. So will you meet us in Vestry Hall to discuss this?
Thank you very much. The fourth question is from Ronnie Lewin.
Thank you. As former chair of Burngreave New Deal for Communities, I'd like to know how local buildings bought by the Burngreave New Deal programme, which are fully owned from resident resources for local community income generation, are going to be opened up for free use to enable local resident development as a part of levelling up or left behind communities' wider agenda and obviously local agenda. Currently Vestry Hall is charged by the hour for use by local residents, although it's fully owned by the very same community. I'd just like to stress that the funds which paid for Sorby House and Vestry Hall and the full renovation, which I believe was £8 million in total, came from outside Sheffield, and there was supposed to be a legacy of income generation from those buildings in partnership with the local authority, putting anchor tenants within from local authority services within those structures, which would produce rents which could be then utilised by the local community. I think that the fact that Vestry is being charged by the hour for use to local residents, although it's fully owned by the very same community, it damages community voice, damages community development, damages community access by a form of privatisation of the very same community-owned assets, which are being, as I understood, managed by Sheffield City Council in one of the poorest areas in the city, notwithstanding the entire country. So my question is, how will levelling up change this immediately as a part of the city's plans in a lasting and meaningful, fully costed way? And that's my question. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. And then the final question is from Helen, and I think you're reading out Helen's question.
Okay, so Helen's question is, Burngreave is the second most deprived ward in Sheffield out of 28. Average household income is just over 20,000 a year, while nearly 30% of children are on free school meals. There are wards on the other side of the city, for instance, Ecclesall, that have over 10 years more in life expectancy, whereas Burngreave is 10 years less. The fact that in these circumstances the Burngreave Vestry Hall, which was built to be used by the community but is at present time mostly empty, is unconscionable. Will the committee chair commit to meeting Acorn Burngreave and discuss our proposal of turning Burngreave Vestry Hall into a community hub?
Okay, Thank you so much indeed. Thank you all for bringing these questions here today. And first, I just want to apologise for the fact that these questions could have been addressed at the last committee meeting. The advice at the time was that this committee, Strategy and Resources, was not the appropriate committee to answer these questions, but that was incorrect. And so on behalf of the committee, I apologise for that confusion, and thank you for your patience. Policy matters come under the council's, that you're referring to today, come under the council's community buildings review, which falls under the remit of this committee, as we're discussing later today. I completely understand the strength of feeling that you and many other residents have for the building and the crucial role that it plays for the community. Vestry Hall is a prominent and proud place in Burngreave, and we're putting in place a new community buildings policy so that there is an open, fair, transparent and consistent process to enable the management of community buildings so that the council can work with the voluntary, community and faith sector to promote their success. The council's got around 100 community buildings that we manage and maintain, with a further very large number that are owned by the council but that are leased out. As I mentioned, we want to have a more consistent, sustainable and asset-based approach to community buildings, which is why today we'll consider the new policy. That policy is being developed with the full engagement of the voluntary, community and faith sector, and the principles of it will be tested over the next 12 months to put in place a full policy in a year's time. That's the context for the discussion today and for my answers now on the specifics relating to Vestry Hall. Regarding the first question about fees and charges from Ms. Anth, thank you very much for coming today. The current fees and charges set by Vestry Hall have been in place for some time and were determined by officers when they were considering the operational expenses of running that building. The policy that you'll see today that we're considering sets out that land and property for the council is not a free resource. We are under significant budget pressures. Council members and officers have a fiduciary duty to ensure that our properties are managed financially effectively. In our work going forward, a standard pricing methodology will be put in place to ensure that users are charged consistently across community buildings, and consistency is a key word there. In the case of ad hoc rental of community buildings, the higher rate will be set annually, and that will be determined by the council's fees and charges setting process. Now, the North East Local Area Committee, in partnership with the council's facilities team, has agreed, as part of the response to a public question about the future of Vestry Hall that took place at the end of last year, I think, to look at how we can improve the use of the building for users and about its accessibility. And there's a community consultation event taking place on Thursday, 4th of April, between 1 p.m. and 6 p.m. at Vestry Hall. And this event will invite the community, and hopefully you'll be able to come along to have your say, share ideas with us and with officers from the local area committee, and I hope that you and colleagues will be able to come. That event will also give details about the current rates, booking processes and funding that's available to groups. There'll be stalls and services from services and partners who can provide advice and help, not least to do with some of the issues you've raised around the cost of living and housing costs. Details of that event will be shared with you, and we'll send around a flyer. The North East LAC team will be there to share details of the community plan and the work that's being done in the area. I'm always happy to meet. In the first instance, I think it's probably right that you speak to the LAC team and the ward councillors to discuss this, but I'm always happy to meet with residents of the city. Regarding the questions from Elisa and Ekram, thank you for coming today, for reading these questions, and for your service as healthcare workers. The North East LAC team has been in touch with the Clean Air Community Network, as I understand, and has sent through a funding application request form. The LAC has also agreed to fund the request for the Eid event with £750 of funding. The request would also like further funding to hire Vestry Hall to hold healthy eating and provide food drop-ins. The North East LAC currently has a cost of living small grant scheme that's open for applications that invites groups to request funding up to the sum of £2,000. That scheme is open until the 22nd of March, so a week on Friday. And I think details have been sent to the Clean Zone Community Network about how to apply for that. Regarding the questions about library provision, thank you very much for coming today. I would like to note that Burngreave does have a library. It's a volunteer-led library, and it's based at Sorby House and Spittal Hill, and can provide details of that. The library does provide connections to health services, self-help groups, health chats, access to health trainers, and lots more. And I think it is a resource that is available in the community. The North East Local Area Committee received last year additional funding to help with the cost of living pressures in that part of Sheffield, and they received around £90,000. The LAC team decided to provide half of that to the Citizens Advice Bureau for the sum of £45,000 to help support their advice line and to widen the capacity to provide advice through the North East area. And Firth Park Library has a CAB interactive screen in a private room that can be accessed. I have mentioned previously the consultation event that the LAC team were organising on the 4th of April, and I hope that you and others might be able to go to that. Ronnie, concerning the question about levelling up awards and the use of Vestry Hall, I would just say thank you again for coming today and for your work with Burngreave New Deal as well. The Levelling Up programme is geographically based around a number of areas in the city, Castlegate, Parkwood Springs and Attercliffe, and so the funding is tied to those projects within those specific areas. I will be the government's biggest critic of their failure to provide significant resource to level up the country and the promises that were made by Boris Johnson and others. I think we would all around this committee tables today feel that that has not been followed through with significant resource. But nonetheless, we have achieved some success in attracting funding, and it's tied to those particular areas. We are working to implement a community building policy, and that's what's on the agenda for today. And this will set out a proposed approach to build a sustainable and asset-based approach for how we're managing buildings like Vestry Hall. So if you're able to stay for the later part of the meeting, you'll hear more about that from officers and members as we have a discussion around that. And then finally, concerning the question around turning Vestry Hall into a community hub, understanding the potential of our buildings and interest in them is going to be a key part of the review that will now be taken forward. We know that provision and use of community buildings is a tool which can then be used to support communities and formed part of a wider strategy to help communities such as that in Burngreave. That's why the forthcoming review of community buildings will involve community organisations, local councillors, the voluntary sector to shape that policy with regards to community buildings, costs, use and transfers. And the event on April the 4th, again, that I've mentioned, will be an opportunity to have a bit more of that conversation. So do stick that in your diary and we'll make sure that you're sent details. I'm conscious there's a lot of information there. Happy to provide that in writing to you if that will be helpful. But thank you very much for coming today. Thank you.
Can I just say, on Vestry, I did mention that those built Vestry and Sorby are actually owned by Burngreave community. So the local authority is just the administrator of those assets. And on your point of levelling up being tied geographically within the city, whilst simultaneously talking about, the levelling up funds not coming as much from central government, to me that's two separate issues. One is the local issue of geographically where those assets have been allocated.
Appreciate that.
Right, which is not Burngreave, so that's a local decision. And the other is obviously you saying that the funds are not as much as what you would like. So I just wanted to clarify on those two.
Helpful. That's really helpful. Yeah, levelling up means a programme of funding that we have been able to successfully attract for specific projects, but the wider mission that we were promised from the government to level up the country is just not possible when since 2010 we have seen nearly half of Sheffield City Council's funding from central government cut. These are two different things, and I think it's right to draw out the clarification as you've just done there. So thank you. Okay, thank you all. Okay, our next question is from Julie Pearn.
Good afternoon. As we understand it, Strategy and Resources is the committee charged with debating matters of significant strategic importance and for considering any policy matter not otherwise allocated to a committee. In the light of this, we note that the drafting of a statement of unity and solidarity with the Palestinian people, agreed in full council on March 6th, has not been referred to a committee per se, but to a cross-party group. Our questions relate to that group. When will this group meet? And what is the composition of that group to be? And I have a number of concerns relating to the composition of the group. In a previous cross-party group of 3, a decision was taken by 2 of the 3 members to fly the Israeli flag on October the 10th, 2023. Other West Yorkshire councils chose to fly the peace flag, so discretion was an option. Would it be appropriate to reconvene only this group of 3, given a past decision by 2 of them to adopt a partisan position? Would it be appropriate to include a member who said on March the 6th, amongst other things, passing a resolution at Sheffield City Council in November didn't bring about a ceasefire. If you really think that passing a resolution is going to change the situation on the ground, I have to disagree with you. Does this committee agree that those utterances suggest a lack of understanding of the central importance of statements of moral leadership to the role of elected representatives, and the way that this builds confidence in the electorate that those elected to serve have high moral integrity? Can we assure petitioners that the composition of the cross-party group will be made up of members who inspire confidence that they are equal to the task and understand the clear brief of producing a statement of unity and solidarity with the Palestinian people, and reflect the supportive tone and content of councillors' contributions in the Chamber on March the 6th. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julie. Okay, to provide a little bit of clarity about the cross-party group, under the constitution of the council, each policy committee may set up task and finish groups to look at in more detail at particular issues. The group that you referred to in the question that I talked about at full council last week will be a task and finish group of the Strategy and Resources Policy Committee. Any formal decisions that need to be made with regards to the petition following the work of the task and finish group will be made by this committee, Strategy and Resources, in a public meeting as normal. That approach is being adopted because it will allow the committee to move quickly in responding to the issues raised in the petition and the debate at full council. The drafting and issuing of a statement, which was one of the key asks of the petition, is not one that requires a formal decision of the policy committee, and so will be able to be actioned more quickly. As per the commitment I made at full council last week, we will do our best to agree this before the pre-election period begins. The composition of the group will be myself, Councillor Shafat Mohammed as leader of the Liberal Democrats group, Councillor Douglas Johnson as leader of the Green group, and Councillor Diane Hurst as leader of the Sheffield Community Councillors group. We are the 4-party leaders that sit on Strategy and Resources Committee, and we will form the cross-party working group. We're looking to meet as soon as possible, and we're just in conversation with each other about arranging a meeting either tomorrow or on Thursday. We've all got quite busy diaries, and we're just working through finding the right time. With regards to the question you asked about flying a flag on October the 10th last year, the decision to fly the Israeli flag, as I've said on a number of occasions before, was taken to show solidarity with the victims of the attack on October the 7th. This was not a partisan display. This was not about taking sides. This was about showing solidarity with the victims of an appalling terrorist attack. That decision will have no bearing on the task that we have at hand now. The cross-party task and finish group will reflect on and consider the very different set of circumstances that where we are now, and it will make recommendations about the next steps that the council will take with regard to the petition. And on the comments that you quoted from a colleague at full council last week, no, I don't agree with the way that you've described them. Let me explain why. At full council last week, I said that words that we say in this chamber matter, as do the words of elected politicians in this chamber and in every part of our jobs. I stand by that. They matter, those words matter for the people of Sheffield, but they can have much greater impact further afield as well. But I must accept, and I'm sure other colleagues do too, that however just our calls, however loud our voices, they of course may have limited or no action at times. That is a reality, but it doesn't mean that it would be completely incorrect to overstate what the council can achieve. That doesn't mean we shouldn't speak out. I'm proud, as I said last week, that Sheffield has a long history of speaking out and speaking up on international matters. This clearly remains the case today, and I do think that we've raised our voices loudly on this issue over the last few months, and the cross-party working group will consider all of that in its work as we now go forward. I have every confidence in every member of that group, and we'll come together to do what is right and in a timely manner. Thank you. And our next question is from Annie O'Gara.
Thank you. At the full council meeting on March the 6th, the petition signed by some 7,500 people was discussed, and after some intense and revealing debate, it was decided to refer the petition to this committee. Petitioners expressed strong concerns about further delays to the council's response to this important petition. They had no option but to contrast the numerous and rapid supportive measures offered without let or hindrance by the council to the Ukrainian people, as clearly demonstrated on the City Council's website. Unnecessary delays will exacerbate concerns about what is seen as the council's selective morality when it comes to some sorely oppressed people in contrast to others like the Ukrainians. Community cohesion, often referred to as a priority by council leadership, cannot be achieved by failure to oppose genocide, apartheid, or by flagrant double standards on whose lives we value. This committee now has the weighty responsibility of discussing further that petition, and our questions today require urgent answers which must then be communicated to the very large number of petitioners. Questions. What is the time frame for this discussion? Will the matter be tabled for the April the 17th meeting, the agenda of which has not yet been set? Second, how will that discussion be structured, e.g., will the Strategy and Resource Committee consider each element of the petition separately and also reach a determination on them separately, as I think we understood from the council meeting? And finally, will the Strategy and Resources Committee undertake today to reach a full decision on all the petition's elements within that meeting?
Thank you very much for your questions. Let me just say there is no selective morality here. All 84 councillors back in November supported a motion which condemned the humanitarian catastrophe that was then only beginning to play out on our screens. And we called at that point for an immediate ceasefire. I have said that on a number of occasions, as have other members around this committee table, and that we would continue to make that call. But look, as I referred to in the previous answer to Julie just now, our clear intention is to issue a cross-party statement of solidarity in line with the petition that we heard at full council as soon as possible, and ideally before the pre-election period, which begins on the 26th of March. That doesn't require a decision of the policy committee. The other matters contained in the petition will require more detailed work, and they will be brought back to this committee to consider with options and with input from officers to provide us as members with the right and appropriate advice. That will not be able to be considered at the meeting of the committee that's scheduled on the 17th of April, because this council is prohibited, as all councils are, from making decisions during the pre-election period on issues that are considered to be politically sensitive in the period immediately before an election. And I think we would all agree that this falls into that category. This year, the pre-election period runs from the 26th of March, set out in national legislation, to the close of poll on the 2nd of May, but we will endeavour to bring this back to the first meeting of this committee after the election. The structure of our discussion will be considered by the Task and Finish group, and again, I've said that we were looking to have that first meeting in the next few days. It is likely that each element of the petition will be discussed separately and determined separately, as you've suggested, and it is our clear intention that we will undertake a full decision on each of the petition's elements, and we'll do that. But it is possible that that will require a bit more time to work them through, which is why we'll need the support of officers to provide us as members with the appropriate advice. But we will bring this back for a full discussion and decisions. Thank you.
2 quick points. The selective morality is illustrated by your own website, where there are no entries under Palestine, but a myriad of points under Ukraine. Secondly, this delay is appalling.
Our next question is from Hilary Smith.
I note that the committee today is considering a report recommending a new flag protocol, and that the report contains a number of days on which will be marked by specific flags being flown each year. I note the absence from that list of the United Nations Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian people, marked on November the 29th each year. General Assembly Resolution 3240B, which was passed in December 1977, introduced the Day of Solidarity, and the UN has marked the day ever since. The UN resolution encourages member states to continue to give the widest support and publicity to the observance of the Day of Solidarity. Some of you may not be aware that Sheffield City Council flew the Palestinian flag on 29th of November each year between 1995 and the year 2000, but has failed to do so since then. Recently, the leader of the council has reaffirmed that the council recognises the state of Palestine. If this is to mean anything at all, it is surely time for the council to commit to fly the Palestinian flag each year on November the 29th. Will this committee agree to do so?
Thanks very much for your question. The flag protocol sets out, as you say, the annual list of flag days where flags will be flown, and it does not include the flags of any sovereign nation other than the United Kingdom. We're not proposing to add particular national flags to the annual calendar. However, as you will see, the new flag protocol includes a mechanism for ad hoc requests to be made to fly particular flags, and really importantly, it sets out a clear decision-making route for how those requests will be determined if they are made. I would just point out, though, that the United Nations flag is included on the list to be flown on UN Day, which is the 24th of October. So we're going to have a new flag protocol which will set out clearly when flags will be flown and how we will determine ad hoc requests. So that is the process we will use to determine when flags are flown. Thanks very much.
You're perfectly aware that the situation of the state of Palestine is different from any other country. So suggesting that the decision about national flags is a normal one in the case of Palestine is completely unacceptable.
Thanks for your question. Okay, And then we have questions from Chella Quint.
Hiya. Thank you. As the founder of Period Positive, and on behalf of our volunteers, young people, and partners, I'm proud to share our long-standing commitment to menstrual and menopause literacy, equity, awareness, inclusivity, and environmental sustainability in Sheffield. For years, our campaign has been at the forefront of advocating on these issues and has been a driving force in Sheffield's journey. Through our volunteers' tireless efforts, we've pioneered innovative approaches to inclusive menstruation education, conducted voluntary advocacy and outreach training, breaking down barriers and promoting confidence among residents across the city, centering marginalized voices, and more recently, reaching beyond Sheffield around the world. We've actively collaborated with schools, community groups, council, departments, charities, and businesses to create more accessible environments. Through our campaign, we've successfully advocated for the recognition and celebration of period and menopause awareness through the Period Positive Pledge, through Period Positive Week, and culminating in Sheffield being recognized as a period positive city through an early day motion submitted by our MP Louise Haigh in 2019. We commend the council on drafting their own charter around period equity and menopause awareness. And today we have some questions about the current charter draft that is presented today. Firstly, language matters. We've observed the language used in the charter draft requires updating. Use of terms like sanitary products and repeated use of the phrase women and girls with only a very brief mention of trans and non-binary people who also menstruate can perpetuate stigmas and exclusion. Will the council commit to updating the charter language and seek out training to improve this standard going forward? Secondly, we believe it's vital for the council to demonstrate transparency and choice in the procurement process for menstrual products so as not to appear to tacitly promote one brand over another. Can the charter ensure fairness and transparency regarding existing relationships with product companies and around new partnerships, purchases, donations, and charitable arrangements, and ensure environmentally friendly options such as plastic-free and reusable products are included? Lastly, our work has been instrumental in shaping Sheffield's approach to menstruation and menopause awareness since long before the very welcome recent motion and charter, and we are proud to see several of our campaign's long-standing aims included in several motion and charter points. How will the council ensure that the charter acknowledges the legacy of the voluntary work of so many of our partners, volunteers, and colleagues across Sheffield so that this continues to be recognized and celebrated within the city? In conclusion, we are here to ensure that our collective efforts toward menstrual literacy and equity and menopause awareness are acknowledged, respected, and continued. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed for your questions, which I'll respond to. But before I do want to acknowledge the contribution that you have made with your work over a number of years on period equity, and in particular your period positive campaign. You and colleagues have done a huge amount to raise awareness of the challenges that so many have with access to period products in our city and across the country, and to advocate for change. I'd like to thank you for working with officers and councillors on the report that we're considering today, and I'm sure that the rest of the committee will join me in saying that. As well as the questions that you've asked today, I know that there were others that you wanted to ask, but given the timescales permitted today, it was not possible to go through them all. However, a full written response will be provided, and that will be included in the minutes of the committee. But turning to your questions, on language, we've used the Equality Act as the basis for our understanding and looked at the impact on all protected characteristics. This has included feedback that language has to be simple and understandable to people of different faiths, ethnicities, cultures and backgrounds, to disabled people, to lesbians, bi and trans and non-binary, and to people of all ages. However, we are happy to take specific feedback and suggestions on how the language in the Charter may be improved and to be made more inclusive. The document is being published in draft, and we're keen to seek feedback and to refine it and improve it further. So would welcome comments from you and others on the draft. On your second question around procurement, the Council sort of notes that donations may take the form of partner to partner rather than via the Council, and so this response relates specifically to Council procurement activities. The Council doesn't currently purchase menstrual products at this time, and that would be subject to our existing procurement regulations and our own policies if we do in the future, including in relation to social value and ethical procurement. It is important to note that we do not have any existing relationship with any providers of period products. And then on your last question, the Council's really proud to have worked alongside a variety of partners over months and years on matters of period equity, menopause, and matters of sex and gender equity. Many partners are specifically acknowledged in Annex 2 of the committee report that we're discussing today, including the Period Positive Initiative. The Council has explicitly recognised the contribution of Period Positive, and on behalf of all of us, we offer thanks for participation at the International Women's Day event last week, as well as the significant work that's been done with Learn Sheffield and with schools in the city, and we very much hope that this will continue in the future. Thank you very much for coming today, and we'll provide a full written response to the range of other issues that you ask questions about, if that's okay.
Thank you. Can I ask for clarification on your partner-to-partner donations comment? I just wanted to see about when there are donations made from a product company delivered by or left in council buildings, the council or that partner might tacitly be seen to be giving approval of that brand over another. And there's a long history and research around this, influencing young people and vulnerable people to purchase that particular brand. How will you ensure that when it's not a procurement situation, which we know protects people from that it's a donation or partner-to-partner issue, how will you ensure that the Charter accounts for that as well, and that there will be plastic-free and reusable options as well?
Okay, I note that point. I do understand the concern. I think it would require a bit of a longer conversation than we're able to have today,
sure.
But we'll make sure that we come back fully on that point, and certainly colleagues can have a longer conversation with you about that, but very much understand where you're coming from on that.
Thank you. And finally, also just to clarify, we really appreciate being acknowledged for the 18 months of work that's proceeded today on the council motion and the Charter, and we are listed among a number of other organisations who were consulted on about the Charter. However, our legacy goes back to about 11 years ago, at least, possibly longer, and several of the points in our pledge are also in the Charter. We would love to be able to continue that relationship and have the people that contributed so far continue to be thanked for seeing their work here, and they won't recognise it if they're not called by name. So we would love to acknowledge that as well.
Okay.
Thanks very, very much.
Thank you very much indeed.
And thank you.
Okay, thank you everybody for all the public questions today. Item number 6 on the agenda is member questions, with none received today. Item number 7 is retirement of staff, and in your agenda packs you'll see a number of colleagues who've retired from the council, and I think on behalf of all of us I would just like to thank them for their many years of long service to this council. We all agreed to endorse that report. Thank you very much. Item number 8 is our work programme, and I'll ask Craig to introduce this and pick out a few bits that we just need to take note of today. Thank you, Craig.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, members have got the latest version of the work programme in their pack. It's less than 4 weeks since we last looked at the work programme, so there are only a few minor changes and additions in there. 2 things that I'd like to draw members' attention to. One is in the report, and that's the council motion from the 7th of February, 5 years since declaring a climate emergency. There are 3 aspects of that motion for SNR to respond to, and we've included in the report a suggested response in respect of the advertising policy element, which is going to Finance Committee next week. Further work is required on the other aspects, and we're hoping to get that back to you as soon as possible. The second thing to mention is not included in the report, but you will be aware that the chair of the South East LAC has written to S&R members in respect of Burley Spa Bath House. That was discussed at their last meeting at the end of February. So we're treating that as a formal request of the LAC that needs to be dealt with as set out in the Constitution. So that leaves the committee with three options on how to deal with that. And they are to refer the matter to a strategic director, to refer the matter to another relevant officer, or to refer the matter to the committee by way of a report. So we're looking for a bit of a steer from members on that.
Okay, thank you, Craig. My feeling is that it would be, as a first step, it would be right for the chair of the LAC to engage with the strategic director in order to understand the issues that are set out in the councillor's email to the committee, have that conversation, have a deeper understanding of the issues that are being raised, and then either be in a position following that conversation to be able to take action, or to bring it back for a report at committee. But it feels to me like the first necessary step is to have a conversation with the strategic director and the chair of the LAC, and so that would be my recommendation for how that request from the LAC is considered. Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chair. Which committee do you envisage it coming back to if that goes that far?
I believe, given the fact that it was sent to us and the fact that it's being considered as part of the Community Buildings Review, that it would be this committee. Okay. So members content that as a first step, a strategic director has a conversation with the chair of the LAC to understand the issues, and then we'll be in a position to be able to determine whether action can be taken at that point, or if a report comes to this committee. Yep. Okay, thanks everyone. I think we just need to formally endorse the work programme. Members happy? Okay, Councillor Johnson.
Just one thing. So on the two items that Craig's referred to, there's we're getting some details, and I just want to make sure that they can be formally added to the work plan so that we don't lose sight of them, because we're not going to have another of these meetings apart from the PERP one for some time. Second question was what we had that came out of the 6th of March full council, if anything, and I'm just trying to remember now if there was something coming from public questions. Do we have anything else we ought to take account of? And again, just thinking ahead now so we don't lose things through PERP and then the sort of hiatus in meetings.
Yeah, thank you. I don't recall anything else apart from the petition being an action for this committee coming from public questions at full council, but if anyone else wants to correct me on that.
Sorry, so in terms of the petition, do we need to put that on the work plan as something, at least as a bookmark, so that we don't lose sight of it?
Right.
That's what I'm suggesting.
Yes. So we've got a meeting of this committee on the 17th, so there'll be an opportunity over the next few weeks in pre-agenda meetings and pre-meetings to consider exactly that, but I don't think any of us want to lose sight of this issue, and we'll make sure that it finds a way onto the work programme, and nor the other issues that you've highlighted. Very much, the pre-election period is not a guillotine on things that are still to be resolved by this committee. Things will carry forward into the next municipal year. Okay, thank you. Members happy to support the work programme? Thank you very much indeed. So, that takes us to item number 9, which is the equality objectives for 2024 to 28 and the annual equality report, including the workforce report for 22-23. And we're being joined to introduce this by a number of colleagues. So, perhaps before we get into the discussion, you could introduce yourselves for the benefit of people watching at home and in the room, and then introduce the reports briefly. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, colleagues. My name is Elise Senior Wadsworth and I'm Head of HR.
James Henderson, Director of Policy and Democratic Engagement.
Adele Robinson, Equalities and Engagement Manager.
Thank you, Chair. This report covers quite a lot of ground. There's a significant number of issues that it seeks to address, and I'll take you through the key issues that are set out in the report. I'd like to start just by a quick apology for the formatting of the papers in the pack, which has gone a little astray in places, and we'll make sure that gets tidied up. So the report before the committee today does a number of things. Firstly, it updates the committee on the consultation undertaken on the Council's Equalities Framework and new equality objectives following the committee's approval of the draft framework back in December. The committee will recall that the equality framework is clearly aligned to the new council plan and provides a focus on the council's ambitions on equality, diversity and inclusion for the next 4 years, including on race equality as detailed in the report to this committee in December. Over 260 people responded to the survey, and more were engaged through face-to-face events through the consultation period. And from that consultation, there was broad support for the framework and for the objectives. The most significant change that has been made in response to the consultation is the splitting of the leadership and communities objective into two to create 4 objectives overall, each supported by 3 more detailed goals as set out in the reworked set of objectives which is appended to this report. A report setting out in more detail the responses to the consultation is also appended as part of your pack. Secondly, the paper proposes an action plan to support the organisation in achieving each of those equality objectives. Each goal within the now 4 objectives has 1 or more key actions associated with it and a number of metrics that will allow us to track progress towards achieving it. This committee will receive an annual report on progress that has been made against each of the objectives through the statutory annual equality report. That action plan will be a living document and will be able to be revised and updated over the lifespan of the framework to respond to the context as it changes. The committee should also note that the set of actions and activities that were agreed as part of the Race Equality Report in December aren't explicitly included in this action plan, but are part of our consolidated work planning, and also that the metrics in the report will be included as part of the broader Council Performance and Outcomes Framework that this committee will consider at its next meeting in April. Thirdly, the report proposes for adoption a calendar of awareness-raising days for 24-25, which is set out as Appendix 5 in the pack of papers. Some members of the committee will recall that we brought a similar calendar to the committee for the first time last year. Because of the number of awareness days that exist, it's important the Council is able to focus on a smaller number to ensure that they are effective and impactful, and the calendar gives us a mechanism to do this. That was considered to work well last year and allows for a more planned approach than we had previously. And as such, there aren't any significant changes proposed between this year's calendar and that we had last year. There is also an alignment between the calendar and the flag protocol, which is later on today's agenda. Fourthly, the papers include the statutory annual equality report for the final year of the previous set of equality objectives, so that's for the financial year 22-23. This sets out the good progress that has been made in achieving each of those objectives, as well as including case studies documenting some of the brilliant work that is going on right across the Council to support our ambitions around equality, diversity and inclusion. Some of the highlights noted in the report include the launch of the Council's new engagement platform, Have You Say Sheffield, improvements in the quality and use of the equality impact assessment process, achieving disability confident level 2 for the organisation, and work towards the establishment of the new employee equality hubs, which are now up and running. The report also highlights some areas of good practice in services, as well as challenges for the Council, not least the challenges associated with the 4th of the previous set of objectives, which was focused around reducing the cycle of inequality and improving life chances, and that's been, as members will be aware, particularly challenging in the face of the cost of living crisis. Finally, the pack includes the statutory workforce report, which includes details of the composition of the workforce broken down by the various protected characteristics in the Equality Act, how that is changing over time, and associated data and metrics, including the gender and disability pay gap. It notes ongoing improvements in the numbers of Black, Asian and minoritized ethnic and disabled staff in our workforce, but also notes that we are not keeping pace fully with wider changes in the community, as well as challenges such as the diversity of our senior officer cohort. Elise is here and will be able to answer any questions that the committee might have on that. I will pause there, but the recommendations are set out on the face of the report. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much indeed. Any members who would like to ask any questions or make any comments about the report? Councillor Naz, then Councillor Johnson.
Thank you very much for the report. There seems to be a lot of hard work that's gone into this, so I absolutely welcome that. The report is good. I really like the action plan. I think that's really important. It's very clear. In terms of the workforce data, page 83, grievance cases by protected characteristics, there's a disproportionate number of employees who are female, BAME and disabled who are making complaints in relation to a grievance. We then go on to talk about a disproportionate number of employees who are BAME or disabled who are raising dignity and respect concerns. I have noted there has been an increase of 65% by BAME women. This seems really, really high. How are we addressing this? I'll ask all my questions and then I'll give you a chance to respond. There's also 60% BAME women, and that also seems quite disproportionately high in terms of raising dignity and respect concerns. But it's also that sentence is also contradicting itself, because you're still saying the number is low after saying that it's a disproportionate number of employees who are BAME. So it'll be good to know what we're doing to address this, because I'm sure I raised this last year and it doesn't seem to have been reduced at all. When it comes to dignity and respect, when staff raise allegations related to race, I sometimes feel investigating managers do not have the right understanding of such issues. Therefore, there is no outcome. However, the consequence for the victims are long-lasting. How will we ensure investigating managers understand the importance of ensuring this is done correctly and not a chore? That's really important. Again, disciplinary and performance cases by protected characteristics. Again, overrepresentation of BAME employees hasn't really been reduced from last year at all. Actually, these numbers are astonishing, and we keep getting told this area will be looked at. That's what I was told last year. Clearly it hasn't. I really don't understand how do we get to this. I don't think I've seen a workforce data report to date that clearly outlines the actions to review against these cases and provide a meaningful explanation. You know, that's what I really like to see. There's also an increase in the number of BAME employees leaving for employer-led reasons. We really need to understand why this is happening. When I'm speaking to people out in the community who have left Sheffield City Council, and I've asked them why, many occasions they have said because of racism, and that is not good enough. These people go back in their communities to talk to family and friends, and it's not, you know, it's not good for us, it's not good for the morale of existing staff.
I have got a question again around apprenticeships, and I think I mentioned this last year. There was a drop last year, we've dropped even further this year. And I know there's been a lot of work that's gone into that area, but for some reason it's not worked. And have you looked at why hasn't that worked? What are the issues? Why are we not able to retain or recruit apprenticeships from diverse communities? Again, when I speak to families, young people in our communities, they would absolutely love to get an apprenticeship with Sheffield City Council. And many times I do refer them on to our apprenticeship team. And either it doesn't get followed or young people are not supported enough and nothing gets done. And then I look at the workforce data and the numbers have dropped again. And it's quite frustrating, actually. You know, it's
Zahira, I'm going to allow the members to comment if that's right.
I'll let you comment on.
Okay. I'm going to bring in Councillor Johnson and Councillor Agencia. Can I just see, does anyone else want to come in on this agenda item? Councillor Jones. Okay, we'll take those four and then we'll come back for answers.
Okay, well, I thought it might be helpful in a way if you answered those questions. Certainly, say, have to agree and endorse exactly what Councillor Naz has been saying in terms of, I mean, I think actually there are lots of good equality initiatives within the council. Kind of my worry is that this is a very long report and there's lots of stuff in it. It doesn't necessarily relate to equality, and there's a danger it drowns out the good things where we've actually made a difference. One example I can see is on the subject of apprentices within the housing and repairs service. Actually recruited a radically different demographic profile in terms of diversity amongst apprentices by a relatively small change to the way that they went about recruiting, advertising and engaging people. And to me, that's the kind of thing that's sort of the real intervention that makes a difference in equality terms. When I practiced equality law, I often had to draw the distinction between actual equality stuff, which is sometimes quite hard-edged, and the sort of fluffy niceness that people sometimes talk about when they want to talk about equality. And I perhaps wonder if we're drifting into that. In terms of specific questions, I just had, my question was really about the objectives and whether they're really specific and measurable. My worry is that we've got something here that's quite a complex sort of document setting out different goals with objectives. And now looking at it, it's quite hard to find any objectives that are really specific and measurable in the way they're set out here. The nearest to get to is actually the action plan, which seem to me to be the real objectives rather than the things that are called the objectives. And I just wondered whether we actually have the opportunity to kind of repackage those and say, maybe in another document again, precisely what we're going to do to set out some objectives. And final point was a very minor one. I think it says there are 9 protected characteristics in relation to the public sector equality duties, only 8. Kind of thing we ought to get right. Thanks.
Councillor Agencia.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that. Just a very quick question. Thank you. It's a really kind of detailed. There's lots of information in there. There's lots of really interesting data. We've had quite a lot of conversations in December about this. I just wanted to, in terms of the, the awareness days, could we also have awareness periods of time, length of time? For example, it's Ramadan started, and here we are having a meeting a bit later than usual. That is not very helpful for people who have to get home and, get into the spirit of Ramadan and, sundown, 6 o'clock. We did the same thing last year when we had the meeting on the eve or Little Eid. And could we have something that just alerts us officers and councillors when these periods are? And I'm not just talking about the, Ramadan. Look, Christmas is easy because it's, culturally we're geared up for Christmas. But, there are lots of communities in, including, when the Jewish kind of festivals are, so that we have them highlighted so that managers can be, aware of that and that they don't expect, officers to be around when they're supposed to be home with their families to, you know, to break the fast, for example. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Look, as chair of the committee, I take that point on board, and you know, we clearly do need to do better in planning the management of these meetings. I think today we can all commit to finish this meeting in a prompt fashion. I'll come back to the team to pick up those points, and then I've seen Councillor Jones, Councillor Williams, and then in the interest of time, I'm going to draw a line there.
Thank you for your questions. And you have to prompt me if I miss any of them. So the first questions you asked were about the increases of employee-led complaints within the workplace. We spent a lot of time and effort and energy, and you've seen some of the results of that in the report, engaging with our workforce to clearly make sure that everybody understands that this type of behaviour is unacceptable. So the increase in complaints is entirely natural. So when we say that we will not tolerate things, people say, actually, when things happen, I'm going to do something about that now. I have confidence that something will happen as a result of doing that. So an increase in employee-led cases in the short term is not necessarily a concern. What we do with them, how they're resolved, of course, each individual one matters to each individual person who's raised it. In terms of investigations, I completely agree. We've got too many managers are being asked to do investigations who haven't had sufficient training, and people in my team need additional support, and we're in the process of commissioning work to make sure that not only will people be sufficiently trained and supported in the technical discipline of carrying out an investigation, but also have the cultural sensitivity and competence to do that when that's appropriate within these types of investigations. The disproportionate representation within our disciplinary procedures is a particular concern, and you're absolutely right, we had some discussion of this last year. So the fact that we are here 12 months on and there's still, you know, an increased picture is a huge concern. There's a number of things that we're doing which are quite detailed, which we won't have time to go into today, but we'll make sure that that information is fed into officers so you are cited on what we're doing. But last year we asked the question, why are people of colour being disciplined? I looked at every single case, every single one, and the numbers are quite small, thankfully, because generally our workforce come to work, get on and do their job, and there are comparatively few issues. And each case seemed appropriate, which showed me that it was the wrong question. So the question is, why are their white counterparts not being disciplined? And that's what we need to try and understand now. The numbers are bigger, and each incident, so why and how do we treat people differently depending on the different cultural background that that person might have? And that is actually a particularly complicated question. But it all comes down to the relationships that managers have with their workforce and the confidence to have culturally sensitive and appropriate conversations. One of the things I'd like to highlight is Race Equality Week this year. We saw many, many more teams taking part in that this year and feeling empowered to have more sophisticated and nuanced conversations and to listen, really importantly, to the lived experience of our workforce. I think the last question you asked was about apprenticeships. Our numbers are rising again, so after quite a big drop post our pandemic, we're starting to see our numbers increasing, and in some areas increasing quite considerably. We've got a significant amount to do in that area. We currently give away some of our apprenticeship levy because we're not spending it sufficiently ourselves. We don't want to be in that position in 12 months' time. We want to be spending that money on our apprentices, on our workforce. We now have a council plan. We need to do some really detailed workforce planning to make sure that we create apprenticeships in the right places to help us deal with some of our skill shortages that we've got right across our services and directorates. And then once we know that, make sure that we target our recruitment. We know that if we approach this differently, we see greater diversity coming through, and young, diverse apprentices are the future of the organisation, so we need to do much more in there, and we have, as others have mentioned, some real successes in that space that we can learn from.
Thank you. We've got Councillor Johnson and Councillor Agencia's points, and then I will, if you could perhaps be brief, and then I'll bring Councillor Jones and Councillor Williams in.
Will do, thanks, Chair. I'll just pick up Councillor Johnson's point and then turn to Adele to answer Councillor Agencia's. So I think Councillor Johnson's question was related to whether the objectives that we have are specific and measurable enough. And I think you highlighted in your question that we have now got the action plan in place, which sets out for each of the objectives a set of actions and a set of metrics that will help us to measure that. And I think that's the mechanism that we use to help us to really track progress and hold us to account. And as I said, we will bring a report back here against progress that we're making on an annual basis. And obviously we'll be monitoring that during the course of the year through the governance structures that we have internally. So the equality objectives themselves are a statutory requirement. It's the action plan that will drive the difference that we want to see, and that's what we will be using. Adele, do you want to pick up Councillor Agencia's point?
Yeah, it's just to say that we have invested recently in something called Inclusive Employers, and that will give us access to a calendar for all staff to use, and that goes well beyond obviously the small amount of awareness days that we've got in this report. It details virtually all days which have awareness days, and that includes all the important religious holidays. And so managers and staff should be aware going forward of all the days, and they should have that to hand.
Thank you. Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Chair. With regards to Objective 4, workforce, people and culture, and specifically Goal 2 about the city's diversity, there are some really great initiatives going on with city anchor institutions, such as in the educational system. I know that within Fir Vale, Rachel Smith has got a workforce that not absolutely, but does largely represent the students and often recruited from the students that went through that secondary school. I know that gives them an unfair advantage on us. However, there are lessons to be learned there, and even Mailing Bridge, where my children go, that school recruits parents from within the wider school community to ensure that that school is more representative of its locality. Are we talking to those in education and the other anchor institutions of the city to ensure we're picking up some of their best practice? And if we are, and this comes specifically to the recruitment element and developing new pathways, amongst some of our communities where English isn't the first language and where they've come from particularly challenging backgrounds, where there's no cultural expectation of filling out application forms or even how to fill out those forms, what are we doing to ensure that that's not a barrier going forward? Because within communities with a verbal tradition, forms don't work particularly well. So how are we going to go out and reach better to those communities to ensure that we recruit those individuals that actually can offer a lot, even though their schooling may have been difficult and their educational attainment may not reflect their true abilities?
Brilliant, thank you. Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, on page 71, you've got a list of these awareness days, and it's a very honourable list, and there's absolutely nobody on there I have any objection to whatsoever. I think there's one glaring omission. Inequality in this country, one of the biggest inequalities is poverty. And I think there can be no downside to having an additional day, if not this year, next year. I'm not going to say celebrate, because that's completely the wrong word, but recognising poverty, how it impacts on people, and the fact, for example, large members of our staff may well know people who live in poverty. So that's my ask.
Okay, thank you very much. I think Meredith wanted to come in to pick up Councillor Jones's point, and then perhaps short reflections on Councillor Williams' point. Thank you.
So there's been quite a lot of work with our schools, and a race equality working group has been established with Learn Sheffield, which is really looking to drive forward, to begin with, to get a baseline of staff in schools, but then also to make sure that we're promoting leadership
that there is conversations about recruitment, retention, and also how that links through to the curriculum as well, and making sure that there's appropriate curriculum. So Linda Joseph, who's head teacher of Springfields, and Linda Gooden, who is head teacher of King Edward's, are co-chairing that board and really driving it forward. So it feels like there's some really good conversations and really good work taking place about how we raise that profile. And also both of those head teachers have championed ensuring that staff from their local communities are part of their school and part of their conversation. So again, how do we grow that good practice so that that team of people are on that and working on that over the coming weeks and months.
Thank you very much indeed. And I think, Councillor Williams, on your suggestion, which is a good one, I think if there's an appropriate point in the year when the concerns that you're highlighting can be marked, then perhaps the team can have a look at that and think about how we can reflect that in the future years. Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much, everybody. So we've got a number of recommendations before us. To agree the new equality objectives, to agree the new Equality Objectives Action Plan, which will monitor progress against the objectives, to agree the annual awareness days for the coming year, and to consider and note the annual equality report for 22-23. Are colleagues happy with those recommendations? Okay, thank you very much indeed, everybody. So item number 10 on our agenda is Period Equity and the Menopause Awareness Charter. And I believe that James and Adele are staying to present that. I wonder if I could just ask Councillor Belbin to also introduce this, given your work with the International Women's Day event last week, which obviously had a direct relationship with the agenda item we're just about to talk to.
Thank you, Chair. I'm really pleased to be able to present this piece of work. It sets out how the Council is proposing to take action around period equity and menopause awareness within the Council, but also supporting partnership working out in the community as well. As people will be aware, I'm sure, the lack of access to suitable period products is a significant issue for far too many women, girls and people who menstruate within the city. That's often to do with poverty and financial insecurity, and that can lead to some real negative impacts and lack of access to education, to social activities and to work. And it can have a real profound impact on people's mental well-being as well as on their physical health. Similarly, I think menopause can be a real difficult time for many women with a range of physical and psychological symptoms associated. And quite often there is a lack of understanding and wider knowledge around menopause, either within workplaces or within society more generally, and that can make people's experiences of going through the menopause significantly worse. So I am really pleased that the Council is taking action. I think we heard earlier on about the, from Chella about the partnership working that has taken place, and there really has been so much partnership working around this area, both around period equity and around menopause awareness. I do want to particularly recognise Councillor Jane Dunn for her work in this area. I know she was building on from the GMB's Smash the Stigma campaign about menopause, and who first brought the motion to full council, and has continued to work on this with partners around the city and across the country. And if I can also acknowledge Chella, who we heard from earlier, who's been a really committed campaigner on this issue for many years and has been working positively, particularly with schools and with Learn Sheffield on period positivity. So the Charter commits the Council to championing and encouraging discussion and literacy about period equity and the menopause amongst employees, ensuring effectiveness of our policies and particularly taking into account the recent EHRC guidance on menopause in the workplace, providing access to advice and support for women and girls and those who menstruate, and working towards provision of access to free period products across council work sites, supporting other organisations in the city to make similar commitments for their employees and service users, including schools, businesses, voluntary and community sector organisations, and continuing to work with the government to press for improved access to information, advice and free menstrual products for people within the city. I'm also really pleased to see the recommendation within the report committing the council to further work to improve access to free menstrual products and including in our own buildings wherever possible. So thank you to the committee for considering this, and I hope you will agree to take the recommendations forward, and in particular to endorse the draft charter, and to thank everybody who has been involved in its development.
Thank you very much. James Adele, I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that, or we can...
No, I don't think so. Apart perhaps just from noting that I believe that the council's menopause policy was agreed following discussion with the trade unions yesterday.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Baker, Councillor Williams and Councillor Miskell and Councillor... Okay, so I've got 4 colleagues who've indicated. So Councillor Baker was first.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for bringing this report. As someone who grew up with menstruating being a word nobody knew and talked about, and things were hidden and kids were kept off, girls were kept off school, and learnt by cheeky little comments behind this shed at school. It's come forward such a remarkable speed, particularly in the last 10 years, and I congratulate everyone who's involved, particularly Jane Dunn, as Councillor Balbin said. She's done an awful lot of work and brought the notice of motion to council. It's also part of this that young men should be aware as well, because there's a supportive process there and an understanding that together we can create respect for one another, and it's all part and parcel of it. So I thank you very much for this report, and I think it's very much on the right lines going forward. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Baker. Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chair. And Councillor Baker's touched on what I was going to say. In the Violence Reduction Unit, there is a campaign for the reduction of violence amongst women and girls. And in that campaign, they have specifically developed campaigns targeting men. I think this could be a little bit braver. And I think that one of the big issues with menopause and periods is a failure by men to understand the ramifications of it all. And I think going forward, perhaps the Charter could reflect that.
Thank you. Councillor Miskell and then Councillor Argentio.
Thank you. Obviously, we know that this is a really important piece of work, and I think it's important to acknowledge that it has been led by women like Councillor Jane Dunn, and we've heard some of the amazing work that Chella's done about the importance of being period positive. And I guess whilst it's important to say that it is led by women, it's important to build on the points that Councillor Williams has said, that actually we as men shouldn't shy away from being proper allies to and backing girls and women and all those who menstruate. And that's why I'll be backing the Period Equality Menopause Awareness Charter today. Some colleagues will know, but outside the town hall, I spent about 2 decades in the classroom teaching secondary school-aged students, and I'm really pleased to say that this has been very much an issue that's energised many of those young people into debate and, most importantly, into action. In fact, Chella's done some excellent work working with many of those students that I've taught over the years. They see the inherent injustice that period poverty brings and the unacceptable stigma that still exists around periods that we need to make sure is addressed in school curriculums, and it fully integrates menstrual literacy as part of as a normal part of daily life into those curriculums. And I'm pleased to see that many Sheffield schools are doing that and stepping up to provide it as part of good quality PSHE provision for all. I think point 2.2 of the report specifically mentions supporting other organisations, including schools, to make the similar commitment for their employees and service users. Now, that's a really positive step and invites other organisations to step up and follow this council's leadership in this particular area. To make that happen in educational settings, what work will be done with Learn Sheffield specifically to support schools in that?
Thank you very much. Councillor Argentio, and then I'm not seeing anyone else, so I'll come back to colleagues for some responses, and then we'll look at the recommendations. Thank you.
Hi, thank you very much for the report, and notwithstanding my full support to the the idea of the Charter on period equity and menopause awareness. I had the same concerns that were raised by the questioner when I read the report before I saw the questions, and I wonder whether we should either, bring it back as soon as possible with some revisions, because I totally agree the language is really important, and how the Charter can be perceived in certain communities might not be felt as inclusive enough, or that if we decide to accept today, that we commit to revising it within a very short period of time with language that is more inclusive, and also acknowledging very, very specifically all the work that the voluntary organisations, including Chella, have done on this, because at the moment it feels like this is something that we have done, but it's not something that we have done. We have done on the back of what the voluntary sector has actually done, and in particular Chella's organisation.
Thank you. I think, as I said earlier on, it's very clear that this has been done in partnership with a range of different partners across the city who have been working on this for not just months but years, and the work that we're able to take forward very much builds on the work that they've been done, and it's been consulted, work developed in partnership, and as we move forward with the draft, it will continue to be done in partnership. Colleagues, I'll hand back to you for some responses to specific questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, councillors. So I think there were a number of comments from Councillor Baker and Councillor Williams about the role of men, and I think that's certainly something that we can take away and reflect. I think that ties in as well with the White Ribbon campaign that we've been supporting within the council as well, against violence against women and girls. So we can certainly look at how we can strengthen that. Adele, I don't know if you would like to respond to Councillor Miskell's point about working with Learn Sheffield and schools on this too.
Yeah, I mean, building on, we have done work over a number of years, obviously, with a number of voluntary organisations, but also Learn Sheffield, and we plan to do the same with this charter once it's adopted, and once we've got that, then we will continue with that work. And I don't know whether Meredith wants to come in here with anything on schools, but we will continue to do that. It would be very much a part of the work that we do.
You're welcome to. Do you want to come in briefly?
And we'll work with Learn Sheffield to make sure we coordinate that, and that work's already taking place.
Thank you.
And just to respond finally to Councillor Argentio's question. So I think this is in the hands of the committee. Very, very happy to do the work as we said earlier. This is a draft charter. That there is an opportunity for us to make some changes to it. We can either bring it back to this committee, or looking at David, it may be possible for us to establish a delegation to make some changes to the charter and adopt it pending those changes in consultation with the chair of the committee. Sorry to put you on the spot, David, but
I was already considering that, James. So. Struggling to find the recommendations to look at it, but I think it does say consider and adopt the draft Sheffield City period equality. So I think I think if we all accept that includes updating in accordance with the comments today, that can then be updated in consultation with the chair.
Colleagues might not have heard that Councillor Argentio was just asking about the timeline for that, and I think I would be hesitant to say right now that this is going to take a number of days or weeks or months. Let's, I think, have a conversation offline outside of this meeting around that, and then agree to make sure that in the SNR planning meetings ahead of the April meeting that members are very clear about the timeline for that. Councillor Belwyn, did you want to comment on that particular point?
Yes, it was just to add, I think the consultation actually is still open around this. So there's a consultation on the Have Your Say website that is still running. So I think the intention was that yes, it still is in draft. Obviously, we're still seeking some input that way. And I think particularly, we do want to make sure, of course, that the language is trans-inclusive and that we will run it by the various groups. Can I just say thanks to everybody for your supportiveness around this as well. It's been particularly great to see male councillors being very supportive of this, and I totally agree with the points that have been made. And if I can thank our trade unions as well. I know we've also had that discussion, and again had really positive discussions very much with our male trade unionists, but as well with lots of the women I spoke to, lots of women at the event last Friday who shared experiences around periods and menopause that I think really demonstrated why there is such a need for this policy. So thanks everybody for your support.
Okay, thank you ever so much. Is it final comment, Councillor Johnson?
Yeah, I was just thinking about just where we go. I mean, I think I support the principle of this. There's some concerns that have come out today, obviously, about how this come out, and actually agree with Councillor Belbin. For this consultation that's still open now, it seems a bit premature to be signing this off now. It's quite clear from the questions we've had earlier on that there's obviously quite a lot of contention around this.
Signing off the draft.
So
we're signing off the draft.
Well, if we're signing off the draft, then what's the plan with it is the question. Would it not be just better to bring it back when it's been done properly and thoroughly, so we actually have a final document to endorse that takes into account all the things being raised today, the remaining issues in the consultation, all the areas of contention that have been raised in public questions today. I think we've heard that we've already signed up to a pledge of some sort, which isn't referenced in the paper, and have a series of work around schools. That should be done. We probably should go back, I think, to the... I was only today, I got to check the original motion from full council, and I was wanting to ask if any action's been taken on the other aspects of that. So it's only realised now that there's quite a few loose ends that could really do with it. And if we are going to bring it back, then that would seem like a good opportunity to be clear about what we're agreeing to. So
I'll let colleagues come in on the specifics, but we haven't signed up to an additional pledge. A lot of work has been done to get us to this point. And here at committee, I don't think this is the time, given the supportive comments that we've had today, to delay any further. We've been very clear from the off in all of the pre-agenda meetings and discussions running up to this point that we're signing up to a draft today, and that there is work to do. And the comments that have been raised today by members of the public, but also committee members, and added to there's comments that will be coming in through the consultation right now, mean that, of course, there is more work to do. That's always been planned. We'll factor that in. And as David said, we can agree a process by building them in, adapting the work accordingly to reflect those comments and bringing it back in a timely manner. But I wouldn't want today to say when exactly that is, but we'll do it in a timely manner as soon as we're able to, once we've reflected on the comments that have been made today and in the consultation. So I think we want to make sure that we are moving forward with this really important piece of work, and everyone's comments today demonstrate that there's cross-party support for doing so. I agree. So maybe it would be helpful if we can just also add to the recommendations to agree to put on the work plan. So take your point about not wanting to fix a date for it to come back, to make sure it does go on the work plan for review when we get to the point of agreeing a final document there. And I completely agree, it is cross-party. The original motion was cross-party. We all had bits in it. Okay, I think Councillor Johnson, David Hollis has just set out that what we're able to do under delegated authority is to look at how we can adapt this accordingly after the consultation. We will have the opportunity over the next few weeks in the run-up to the April 17th SNR meeting to discuss that cross-party about what the next steps are. It may be that we decide to put it on the work programme, but it may be that we can move quicker on that. So I would rather leave the recommendations as they are today, and move forward as we've discussed at a number of meetings up to this point. So with that in mind, I will suggest that we move forward to the recommendations unless there's any final comments anyone wants to make. Okay, so we've got a number of recommendations that we consider and adopt the draft Sheffield City Council Period Equity and Menopause Awareness Charter, agree that further work should be undertaken to identify a sustainable approach to funding the provision of free menstrual products, recognise and thank the partners, organisations and individuals who contributed to the development of the Charter over the last 18 months. A huge amount of work has gone on, and note that we've got a strong tradition in this city of partnership activism to address matters of period equity, and we thank and recognise everyone who's contributed to that work. Our colleagues happy to support those recommendations. Do you want to just put your mic on so we can capture it?
Beg your pardon, yeah. So just for the record, yeah, I'm going to abstain on that. So this is uncomfortable in endorsing something that's clearly not finished.
So support of, indications of support from everyone. Abstention from Councillor Johnson and Councillor Argentia. Okay, just want to be clear on the record. Okay, thank you very much, everybody. Item number 11 is community buildings policy adoption and the associated pilot project. And I'll just let Tom and Peter come up. If you could just introduce yourselves and then perhaps briefly introduce the paper, that would be really helpful. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Tom Smith, Director of Operational Services and lead on the Council's Accommodation Review.
Good afternoon, I'm Peter Bartle from the property team.
Yeah, thank you both. If you could perhaps just briefly introduce the paper, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This is quite a detailed paper, and as we can see from the earlier council questions, a quite important paper in terms of how we take forward community buildings in the city. We agreed to undertake a community buildings review as part of a paper in November 2022, and the overall accommodation review. And this is sort of starting to put some of the meat to the bones, I guess, in terms of how we start to take that work forward. I think, again, it's really important to recognise that as we do that, that our community buildings are hugely important to our communities and to our objectives as a council in terms of what we want to do, and working with people in developing our communities and empowering our communities and working with the voluntary sector. And the thread of our city goals and our council plan are really strongly within this plan of work going forwards, and we're really keen to take a very asset-based and positive approach to this piece of work. So whilst, you know, the challenges around our budget are very well documented, and across the country that is challenging for community buildings in particular, you know, we really want to make sure that we are looking at all the potential options in dealing with those challenges, not just selling things off. We want to work with our communities and with the voluntary sector to come to a sustainable financial position. We've been doing some work with the voluntary community sector in the city over the last number of months. And in doing that, we started to develop a number of policy documents. The feedback from the voluntary sector at the time was that they felt they wanted to work with us to develop those policies over a period of time. But in doing that, we are aware that we've got in abeyance a number of requests around community buildings from a number of organisations wanting to take forward community asset transfers. So in that conversation, we came forward with a proposal which was to bring forward an initial community buildings policy so that we weren't stuck anymore in terms of some of those requests, so we could start to move them on. But where we would limit that to a 12-month period and work with the voluntary community sector and other stakeholders to co-produce a new policy which will be much more fit for purpose, much more asset-based, and enable us to take this piece of work forward into the future with the sector and with the support that the sector will need to do that. Also in doing that, we talked a bit about the practicalities of that policy development, and what transpired out of that was that I think we agreed as officers and the voluntary sector that it would be really good to get into some practical examples in developing that policy, and therefore in discussion with colleagues we've brought forward a proposal for a pilot within the south of the city which will help us to look at that particular area and help us to again develop the policy, review the buildings in that area and support and put forward the kind of support the voluntary sector and others would need to bring some of those buildings into a sustainable position in the future. Lots of detail in the report. I'll probably leave it there, but just to reiterate in terms of the recommendations. So, adopting the community building policy, which is an interim policy for 12 months. A community building pilot in the south locality area committee area, and that will inform the development of that revised community building policy, which will come back to this committee. To agree a proposal around 22 housing revenue account buildings, which were part of the housing budget agreed in February. They're appended in Appendix B. They are cross-city, but again, we'll be using those as part and parcel of the pilot process and to look at all the options in terms of policy. And as I said, final thing, that we will bring back a policy in 12 months to this committee for agreement following engagement with voluntary sector and others. So hopefully that's useful.
Thank you very much indeed, Tom. Okay, in the interest of time, can I see who would like to speak on this? Okay, right. I've got 8 members who've indicated. I'm going to ask you to be brief and keep your comments limited and your questions focused, and then we'll take them in rounds of 3. But I am going to be I'll have to cut people off because we've got 5 agenda items. This is one of 5 still to go, so we'll be brief. Okay, Councillor Smith was first.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, guys, for the report. If I'm honest, I've got some concerns. It seems to be heavily predicated, if that's the right word, on disposal. If you read between the lines, that appears, or the general tone in many areas seems to be that is, if not an overt, perhaps an underlying objective. And so there's not a lot in there about how the assessment is going to be made of need. So there's one section that talks about what we're going to do with surplus buildings, but it doesn't actually say how we're going to check for whether it's surplus or not. And and also how it fits in with demand. We heard from some of the questioners right at the beginning of the meeting about there is a demand out there that's not being met. And the other one is we have as a city major objectives, major targets for housing growth. So I don't know how we're going to build into the review here that we may identify a facility that's surplus to current requirements, but we might be building 5,000 homes just down the road. So how can you give us some reassurance as how that whole question of whether something really is surplus going to be built into the study?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Councillor Smith. Councillor Hurst.
Yes, thank you. I've got a number of questions on this. In developing this, the community buildings policy, there appears to be a 5-point framework in place which is due to be developed throughout the pilot project over the next 12 months. However, has this framework been used to determine the future of the 22 community buildings specifically listed in the appendix? Have they passed through this assessment process, or what criteria has been used to assess their utility and benefit? What engagement or information giving or consultation has been undertaken in respect of those community buildings with their user groups? What involvement have elected members had in developing that list? I'm aware it's a failed savings proposal from 22-23, and I know that it appeared in the HRA budget as a pressure, but what involvement have elected members had? Given that the community rooms featured are being disposed of from the housing revenue account, what's the cost to the general fund of this transfer? can you reassure me that no buildings will be closed as a removal of this, will be closed as a result of this removal from the housing revenue account? And what is the impact on the tenants levy as a result of these disposals?
Okay, thank you, Councillor Hurst. What I'm going to suggest is, Tom, Peter, I'm going to come back to you now for answers on those two, because I feel like some of the answers you might provide could be useful for subsequent questions. There's obviously quite a bit there, but if you could try to be as brief as possible. Councillor Hurst, can you just switch your mic off? Thank you.
Sure. So I might kind of go backwards a little bit, if that's okay. So the first thing I would just want to be really clear about is that the buildings that are listed within the appendices, no decisions have been taken about those buildings. So no decisions have been taken about any of the 22 HRA buildings to dispose or close them. No decisions have been taken about any of the buildings that are on the sort of backlog list in terms of community asset transfers, that they will be transferred to the community or anything else will happen to them. What those lists are our kind of first priorities in terms of this piece of work to decide what needs to take place with those buildings to get them into a sustainable position financially. When it comes to those 22 buildings on the HRA, so they were assessed through the housing budget process, so it's quite difficult for me to talk to kind of the process by which they were shortlisted. But what I can talk to is what we will do now, and what we will do now is engage with the people we need to engage with in order to understand the usage of those buildings, what is currently happening in them, and what the options are going forward to bring them into a sustainable financial position. Now, some of that might be bringing them into the general fund of the council, but in doing that, clearly, as a council officer, I will have to ensure that that is done in a financially sustainable manner. There isn't any point in just transferring something out of the housing revenue account into the general fund. That won't help the council's overall financial position. In terms of the closure of those particular buildings, I can't say what the outcome will be of those reviews at the moment. What I can say to you is that, you know, we are not assuming disposal. So our starting point is not that. Our starting point is to look at what they can be used for and look at what we can do in terms of working with the voluntary sector or others in order to get them in a sustainable financial position. That's the aim of this exercise. The aim is not to, you know, get rid of all the council buildings. The aim is to try to get us into a sustainable financial position with those buildings. And there's lots of ways we can do that. Talking a lot to the voluntary sector, they have lots and lots of ideas about how we can do that, and they are very keen to look at all those ideas and all those options as we move forward. I think probably in terms of that assessment that Councillor Smith, I think you were talking to, what we're really keen to do is to work with the voluntary sector and other stakeholders to undertake that assessment in an engaged way. You know, this isn't. If the report reads as if actually we are just going to go out and dispose lots of properties, then I apologise for the tone of the report, because that is not the intention in any way, shape or form. The intention is genuinely that we want to work with communities to look at the future of these buildings because we see them as an asset base in our communities. We're working a lot with local area committee officers and lots with the communities team as well, so we see this very much as a community development exercise as much as a buildings exercise.
Thank you. Councillor Belwin.
Thank you. Well, coming back on both those questions, I suppose, first, I think, as I recall, from the list of community buildings from the HRA from last year, there was a really clear criteria why they were there in the first place, and that was based on their usage rates prior to COVID, which was, I believe, if they were being used less than 10% of the time. So I think that's where the list came from when it originally came last year. But I think even when we were discussing it last year, it was really clear there was going to be a review process. So I do feel we've set some hairs running rather with some of the conversation at full council last week over this. And it's absolutely clear some of those buildings now have far, far more than 10% use. And, you know, there will be quite active community resources. Others, I suspect, I know of at least one building on there that I don't think is occupied at all or used at all. And, you know, there'll be others that are used infrequently. But I do think we need to be clear that when we're talking about community asset transfers and disposals, that doesn't actually mean that the council no longer owns buildings or is getting rid of buildings. If you look through the asset transfer process, you know, it's a different set of different arrangements that could possibly exist, including management agreements and short-term leases, and not just about selling off buildings. And I think, you know, some of the way this has been portrayed is not accurate. Having worked for an organisation that went through this process and took on a long lease for a building that is still owned by the council, then I have to say it was a very, very positive experience. At that time, you know, really ably supported by council officers. And yes, it was rigorous and was rightly rigorous to go through a rigorous process. So we understood as an organisation what we were taking on, what the costs would be, etc. None of that is straightforward. But as a result of it, by running that building, we've been able to use it as an asset and bring lots more funding into that area that the council would not have been able to access. So funding through National Lottery and organisations like that, for example, that I think have then led to further investments within our communities. So I think it's great that we've got a policy in place. I think it's been unfortunate that we've not had a consistent process to follow. And I think this is a really positive step forward for the future.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Genzio.
Just a very, very quick point. I think it's a really good thing that we are aiming to have like a process that is precise, that is fair on everybody, is clear, because that's what we've not had. It's always been a bit ad hoc, depending on the building, depending on the organisation. So it's good to have. But if the report has come across either to members or people out there and is worrying people, we need to make sure that we spell out that we're not rushing off to selling community buildings or to sell off community assets, because that is something in meetings. This is something that nationally councils who are in financial difficulty are rushing off to selling assets because they don't, so they don't have to maintain them. Once the assets go, especially if they go into private hands, they're gone. They're not, you know, you can't go back. So it's really important that we spell it out in our communication, and we, you know, we have the correct headlines rather than the scaremongering headlines.
Yep, thank you very much indeed. Councillor Baker, and then Councillor Williams next, and then...
Thank you, Chair. I think we've got a problem, a very simple problem, that this list was first seen by the majority of the councillors when this report was published. This report is necessary for a lot of things, and the bits about community assets, we've got to get them through. We need them for communities who are trying hard to gain community assets. But as soon as you put a list that names properties in a report that you haven't discussed with TARAs, and they, you know, most of these are TARA rooms, you've got hairs running. And you can't give the very eloquent speech that we've just had, explaining it all, to tenants of 38,000 properties. So we've got an issue that shows a gap in a report. So we've either to remove the list from the report and put some more guidance and information in, or if we wish to remain the list in, we've got to put more information in it so that people understand that they're not going to sell off their community centres, because it doesn't matter how many times I go and explain to somebody that this is not the case, this is not what was intended, you know, but it says it in the report. So, Chair, with all respect, the hell of a lot of work I know has gone into this, but as this report stands at the moment, it would cause us more concerns than solve problems.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of points from me. Firstly, I appreciate the amount of work that's gone into this report. Right? This has been hanging around for far longer than I have been on the council, and it's well brought forward. A couple of comments. I am concerned about the ongoing use of the phrase asset-based approach to this, because I think it should be a community needs-based approach. Notwithstanding, I know there is a need for the council to concentrate its asset base because it costs too much to run, and we see this all over the city. So I get that, but I think community needs based is more appropriate than asset based. I'm also a bit concerned about the use of the phrase "what is community asset transfer." This is on page 233, which tries to define what a community asset transfer is, and in fact you've got 5 options, which to me, maybe the last one, talking about longer term leases, is a community asset transfer. I don't think a license to occupy is an asset transfer. It might be legally, but I think we're talking about this going out to the general public and communities and what they determine. I know I've spoken to a couple of people who are looking at getting control of the building they operate out of, and their view of a community asset transfer is not this. And the only other point, and it's a small one in the scheme of things, is on page 225, you talk about payments, and you have a nice long list of the criteria which we've done in terms of setting payments. One thing you don't have is the ability to pay. Our different communities in the city are very diverse. Some communities just don't have the money that other community groups will have. I know that part of the ambition of this was to try and normalise things, but I think there has to be some factoring in of the ability to pay. Thank you.
Councillor Austin.
Thank you. Echoes those comments. I'm particularly able to remember the questions we had at the beginning of the meeting on the raised the issue of ability to pay. Yeah, I appreciate that officers have gone and done a piece of work they've been asked to do, and there's no criticism implied here of officers. And it's a piece of work that needs doing. We do need to review the estate. However, what we seem to have is a report that, can I say, minces its words a little bit. I'm struck by the line in paragraph 1.6.5 that says, "It is important to stress that the review of these buildings does not assume that a decision will be made to dispose of them in order to deliver the necessary budget savings." Now, that's the sort of phrase that you say when, yes, you can't assume that, but it is kind of the direction we're heading in. That is the intention, that is the default. And so I think when people see that and then they read the list of buildings later on, they think, well, you know, we're on the hit list. We might not get hit, but there's every chance that we will. And I'm also struck by the wordings in the equality impact assessment at the end, because it says things like, you know, you pick a characteristic, and it says community buildings will be available for use by, or community buildings could be used to provide. Well, that's not an assessment of the impact of closing community buildings, is it? You know, if you close a building in which a group meets, that support is mutual support, whatever it is, for people with a particular protected characteristic, and they can no longer meet as a result, that is a significant impact, and it is an impact we need to take into account when making this decision. So I'm not sure we can even legally make this decision as it stands.
The EIA is about the draft policy that we're being asked to consider today, not about the future of those buildings. So I think the point you're making is slightly off.
Well, if it is only the draft policy we're being asked to decide, then that is not at all clear from the report and from the EIA itself, which says at the front, it says, yes, the introduction of the policy and associated pilot will impact across primarily blah, blah, blah. It doesn't say what the impact is, it just says there will be one, which again is not an adequate thing for any EIA to say. So you know, I hear what you say, Tom. I'm not sure that the report in front of us bears this out. So in summary, I am concerned. I don't think we can agree this as it stands for all the reasons that have been given. I do have a couple of options on proposals for a way forward, but I'm happy to come back to those after other people have spoken.
Well, let's let's let Tom provide some responses, because I think there's some things that just need clarifying. So Tom, if you want to come back, and then perhaps I can summarise where I think we are, and then Joe, we can come to you.
Yeah, thank you. So I guess just try and clarify what this report is doing. So firstly, this report doesn't make, as I said right at the start of this presentation, any decisions to dispose of any building. There is no decision in this report to dispose of any building that the council owns. It doesn't even present a policy to dispose of any building, because we already have a disposal policy, which is agreed by committee, I think, in 2022, and could be used right now. We have a disposals policy. If we want to dispose of buildings, we are able to do that today through the policy that is already in existence. This is a community buildings policy with a community asset transfer policy associated with it that enables us to transfer assets to people who wish to take them on. It doesn't change our disposals policy at all. So this policy, which is in front of you today, doesn't change our approach to the disposal of buildings. Doesn't. What it does is it sets out an interim policy that allows us to take forward some of the people who've requested community asset transfers already. It allows us to work then with the community and voluntary sector to develop a new policy over the next 12 months, which is hopefully better than what is currently being proposed, being frank. Gives us the time to do that while still moving on some of the community buildings that we've got. It allows us to actually address some of the comments that you're making, frankly, because as we co-produce a new policy over this next 12 months, these are exactly the sorts of things we want to make sure that we include within the policy, including impacts on, differential charging, equality impacts on different parts of the city, all the sorts of things that we haven't managed to currently get in, because we want to do that with the community as we move forward over the next 12 months. And the pilot in the south also allows us to test out some of the thinking around this with protections. And I think within the report, we've hopefully set out that we are not going to disadvantage the South Lock area in any of this review work. We're going to seek to be fair. We are not going to, close loads of buildings in the south as part of this review, when we're not doing the review in the north. That isn't the intention, and hopefully we've set that in the report that that's the case. It really is about a learning exercise that allows us to come back in the future with a much better policy that actually genuinely addresses the concerns that members have set out. So I don't actually disagree with a lot of what members have said, frankly. What I would just want to be really clear about is that this report doesn't change our disposals position. It doesn't make any decision to dispose of any building, including any of the 22 HRA buildings that are listed on here. It sets out a way forward in terms of our policy framework and a way forward in how we'll develop a new policy and how we will engage with our communities to do that. So that's all I would really say.
Thank you. Councillor Johnson, you had a very brief point, and then I know that there are other members, but brief.
Yeah, just say, I support this report because it's a report for a plan to get on and do something, which is frankly what we as a council needed for some years. With the list of 22 buildings in the HRA, I just want to point out that they were discussed, not just this year, but also last year they were identified, as we know, as Councillor Belbin said too. The reason is they were buildings that were identified at that time. It might not be current now, but at that time was being in use for less than 10% of the time. And we have to ask ourselves, how much can we justify spending on the maintenance and security of those buildings? There's a revenue cost going on each year when they're in use a very small amount of the time. If we do that, then how do we justify that to tenants when we're cutting services? So if we can get on with this piece of work, that's fine by me.
Thank you. I think I'm right in saying, Councillor Johnson, that it's an undelivered BIP from last year. So this has certainly been well discussed by not just one committee, but several, and indeed full council has been cited on this previously. Councillor Hurst, I know you wanted to come in very briefly, and then we'll come back to Councillor Otton, and I'm going to then draw a line and we'll work out where to go with this. Thank you. Councillor Hurst.
Thank you, yes. This was in fact an undelivered bit from last year, and when I saw the list last year and the rationale for choosing to dispose of these buildings last year, I criticised it then because it was very flat and paid no credit to the use of those buildings and the importance of them within the community. And I know what a good piece of partnership work can achieve in the community. Last Friday I was at a leaving do at the Woodhouse Community Library, which the proposals for that, and Penny's smiling at me, and I knew she would, But the proposals for the development of that building came out of the Woodhouse Local Asset Management Plan, and David was one of the members in that area that approved that. So I know that a good piece of considered work can achieve massive things for the community. However, I do not feel that the inclusion of these lists gives any weight or credence to the development of the policy that is being considered. I think it detracts from that, and I think it will create a lot of fear and uncertainty in community groups that we don't need for community members that are working very hard.
Thank you, Councillor Hurst. I think it's incumbent on all of us then to make sure that we're really clear with community groups across the city just exactly what this decision that we're taking today is and isn't. It's a decision to review a number of buildings across the city, not to make any decisions about their future. So I think we've all got a part to play in being clear with communities about what is contained within this report and what would happen over the next 12 months as a draft policy is worked through, is tested, and that we learn from it, and that it's brought back within 12 months. Councillor Austin, I know you wanted to come back, so just quick, and then we will come back.
Thank you. So my concern is that a review of community buildings like this should be based on an assessment of need, engagement with local members and the LACs, and a genuine consultation and engagement with the community groups affected. Now, I appreciate we're talking about consulting with the community on a revision to this policy that is in the document here. What I think community groups using community buildings will want to know is not what policies you're going to have, but are you going to close my building or not? That's the point that they should be consulted on, not, you know, what's the scoring matrix or whatever it is. So I think the two options are either to ask officers to go away and do some more work on this to bring it back, taking into account the comments that have been raised, or if we wish to agree it today, I've got some wording here. Let me pass that along, if you can pass that up, which would be an additional recommendation that we agree there will be no closures or disposals of community building under this policy until A, there has been an assessment of community need, and B, there has been engagement with local members and the relevant LAC, and C, there has been a genuine consultation and engagement with community groups affected, and the closure or disposal has come back to the relevant committee for a decision. So with that amendment, I would be content to support this policy.
Okay, well, let's just take a moment then to consider this, because this is quite a detailed amendment. I didn't see a printer under your desk there, so maybe you might have been, this may have been something you've been working on for a little while, which, given that we've had a couple of meetings about this in advance, is, you know, it would have been helpful to have early sight of this. So,
with respect, Leader, we printed that off at the last minute when we were running down to facilitate this.
Yeah, I think if we're going to consider this, then we probably need to stand down for a while so we can consider it and discuss it as to whether we think it's appropriate. Oh, but it's a matter whether members, whether this committee initially wants to put this forward.
May I say, Chair, this is actually what officers have been saying that they're going to do. So,
yeah, sorry, Joe, do you have any more of these copies? Because Tom doesn't have one. Councillor Johnson?
Yeah, Tom. Thanks. I wouldn't be mind to support this because, as Tom Smith has just said, we already can dispose of buildings, so it would seem odd to have something that cuts across our ability to do that and will inevitably end up with some weird results. I mean, given that actually in some communities people are asking for building transfers to be developed, and that's been one of the criticisms of the council for continually delaying like we're proposing to do. So I'd probably suggest And given that it's a completely redundant amendment, as Councillor Baker's pointed out, the officers are going to do this work in practice anyway. If we just reject this now, then we can approve the policy as proposed so that officers can actually go on and do the work which is described here. I think that works.
Minor revisions are one thing to table at a meeting, but this obviously requires proper consideration. I think it's right to just give Tom the opportunity to come back for 1 second. I'm aware there's other members with it who are indicating. Tom?
Yeah, just very briefly. So I think, as members have said, I don't think that, you know, the sort of the sub-clauses A, B and C would be anything that we wouldn't be intending to do. So, you know, in terms of, you know, the intention of this, the engagement with communities around the buildings would have to take place and would always take place before we took the decision to dispose of the building. The last sentence in terms of the disposal itself is covered by our existing disposals policy and needs to be taken in line with that policy that was agreed by committee, and that doesn't necessarily always mean it comes back here. It depends on the particular building concerned.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. I think, you know, again, the first line, any disposal would be done under the disposals policy, not this proposal, this policy that we are considering today. And so this, I'm afraid, doesn't quite make sense in terms of what we're being asked to consider here. Councillor Smith.
The key word here, Tom, is reassurance. We heard right at the beginning that, you know, and there's absolutely nothing personal in this at all, that this report will set hairs running. That list will cause significant concern in the communities. And what we're trying to do here is put across a simple amendment that officers seem to agree with that can provide that extra layer of reassurance. I really don't see what the problem is with that.
Thank you. I wonder then if there is an amendment which members might support, which is about reassuring people that what we're being asked to consider with this policy is not to make decisions on buildings, and that we can reassure communities and tenants of all of these buildings, users of these buildings, that there will be discussion with them about the future of their building. I think if reassurance, you know, is required, then that is something that we can, you know, certainly add on.
Chair, if I may, I mean, I think the 2 points of reassurance in the amendments that I'm looking for here is A, that it talks about closure as well as disposal, and B, that it gives the final decision back to a committee of this council, so under the new committee system, let's remember, we make these decisions in public at meetings so the public can come and make their points, put their questions. So those are the kinds of reassurance, because the thing is, if we pass this policy without doing that, then we're saying these decisions might be made, you know, at any time by we don't know who. Okay. And if we say it's got to come back to a committee, then the people out there have a reassurance that that's not going to happen, you know, behind closed doors.
On the hoof, this committee can't rewrite the disposals policy, which is what that final line is asking us to do. I think there is a set of recommendations here which people are, you know, have indicated support for, and I feel that, you know, this is throwing up at the last minute too many questions which, you know, are not within the remit of this committee to do. It's the disposals policy is being asked to be rewritten here. It is all of our jobs to provide reassurance about what this community buildings policy is there to do. So if reassurance is sought, reassurance can be provided that no decisions are being taken through this policy. It's about a review. Councillor Hurst?
One of the other options that Councillor Otten gave was to take it away and reassess and come back with when more work had been done. And that involves, you know, looking at reassurances. So can we not decide not to take that decision today until that additional work has been done?
I just want to make a point that I'd like to pay tribute to officers in the council who've been working incredibly hard over the last year with the voluntary sector, in a very new way, with a joint, open advisory group to help us develop this policy. I'd just like to make that point around the sort of implication that a lot of work hasn't been done. I think it's really important to just acknowledge that and to acknowledge the work of the team on this. It's an incredibly complex policy, and I just want to say that. Thank you.
Councillor Bellman.
Yes, I would totally agree with that last comment and ask people to remember that this was developed with the community groups and community organisations, which I think is really important. I think I really am against pushing this back to another committee. We have got some organisations that are champing at the bit, to be quite honest, to take on buildings because they want to serve their communities, and who these discussions have been taking place with over years, and who are desperate to get on with it and are poised to turn some buildings into really fantastic community assets. Apart from the issues that the Chair has raised, I think, about the disposal, I do think the rest of the amendment just doesn't add anything. I think it's already in the document around genuine consultation and engagement, and that there will be a review of these assets.
Okay, thank you. I've got a number of members who've just indicated quickly. I'm going to ask for brief contributions, and then I'm going to come to make a decision on this. Councillor Jones, you've been waiting patiently, just quick, and then Councillor Hurst, Councillor Baker, and then that's it.
Thank you, Chair. With regards to the proposal that's been circulated, I understand the sentiment behind it. Point C, I think, is somewhat addressed on page 83 already within the report. Point B, I think, is it could be fleshed out more, but you know what, I think there is mention to relevant lacks on page 98, and point A is within the remit, I think, 5.1.1, which is on page 229. So I think I understand what you're saying about you want some assurances so that the general public out there don't panic, but I think that the wording is already in there. I think there is already hinted at in there, so I'm not sure these necessarily do anything to enhance the policy.
Councillor Hurst.
Thank you. I didn't intend to give anyone the impression that I was disrespecting the work of officers or the voluntary and community sector, but I am aware that questions have already been asked in the community when these papers were published for the council, because I know that there's one particular community centre not in my ward, but is used as a youth group, a community pantry, and for a carers and toddlers group, but features on that list, but is not now because of redevelopment located in an area of council housing and does not have a TARA. And they first read that they were on this list when they saw the paper, and they haven't even had the email that went out to TARAs saying your building's under review. And giving this, changing our recommendations so we provide this reassurance, Tom, as the lead officer, has said, well, we're intending to do A, B and C. Does it hurt to put those in? Does it hurt to amend in that way? Just to provide that additional reassurance to hard-working community groups that they're not just up for the axe without any particular thought and considered process having taken place.
Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Chair. No disrespect to officers at all. The work they've done, as I said in the first place, is much appreciated. What we've got here is a problem of language regarding one particular point in the report. It's a draft report, we know it's going forward, but we know that that list has already started hairs running. And before we pass the report, and to me, if you know it started causing hairs running and you don't want it to distract from the rest of the report, I know exactly what you mean about community groups wanting assets of community value. Absolutely, and we need that. But if we don't get this right, we're at this little bit, this very small half a page, could throw a shadow over the whole of the report. And I really don't think that's respectful to officers. We can do something about this now, quite simply, by adding, how many lines were they? Yeah. If we can't add the final line, we can't add the final line. We accept that. But just remember, we are not talking to other councillors here who can read the details of reports. we're talking to a population who will look at it and say, I'm on this list, what they're doing to my... And we've got to respect them as well. And we're putting, in my opinion, undue pressure on them. And we can do something about it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
I think this amendment, as it's written, couldn't go forward as a viable amendment for the strategy and resources to vote on today, because, well, it makes two errors that have been pointed out. It says that there will be disposals under this policy when they're not under this policy. And the third and the final one is that it rewrites the disposals policy without considering the implications for that policy and re-looking at that policy and how it might impact on it. So this isn't a matter, as it's drafted here, that this committee could vote on today.
All right, thank you, that's helpful. In which case, then, we have the recommendations as they are ahead of us. I think it is incumbent on all of us, members and officers, to provide reassurance to the organisations that are named here and those that are not about what exactly this work is going to entail. And I know that the Towers were contacted in the last week, but as Councillor Hurst has mentioned, that may not have captured all of the tenants and organisations who use these buildings. So I think I would look for assurance from Tom and colleagues that we redouble our efforts over this next period to make contact with all of the different users of those community buildings to make it really clear what this work is going to entail and what it doesn't entail, and that this is about a review which may involve them being able to have greater control and greater community use of those buildings. I think with that reassurance, we should press on, and that feels like there is support for this from across the chamber, and there has been support for this work being developed for many months now to get to this point. So I will suggest that we move to the recommendations as they're set out. Are members willing to support those recommendations?
Chair, if you could just give us a moment.
We're going to need to extend the meeting in a moment. We've already had a long conversation about this. Colleagues, is there what? Okay. Do we have a proposal? Councillor Williams?
Are the lists part of the policy, or are they separate?
They're separate.
They are separate. They're not in the policy.
But they're in the policy document.
Thank you.
So the policy is a policy that will apply to every community building across the city. It's the policy.
So can I ask why they appear then? What it brings to the party?
Well, I think we've had a discussion today about why different buildings are included in here. I think unless there's okay, there's colleagues are discussing over here. Let's vote. So we've got 4 recommendations. Strategy and Resources Policy Committee recommended to adopt the community building policy, adopt a proposal for a community building pilot in South Lack, agree the proposal to prioritise the review of 22 buildings that currently sit within the HRA build account, and then to agree that the findings of the pilot project will inform a revised policy that will be developed working closely with the voluntary community and faith sector and submitted back to this committee within the next year. Joe, are you happy to support those recommendations?
I'd like to vote against the third recommendation. I'm happy to vote for the other 3. That the third recommendation relating to the 22 HRA buildings, I want to vote against that in the spirit of the comments I made earlier. So I'm quite happy to just come back with the work that we've asked for done on it. So it's not it's not an outright rejection. But yeah, I would like to vote against recommendation 3.
You can't vote in party. Would have to be a motion to remove that recommendation.
I propose a motion to remove recommendation 3.
Okay, we are now having a vote on the motion to remove recommendation 3. Can I see colleagues who are in favour of that motion? Okay, colleagues who are against that motion? Okay, that motion falls. So now we have a vote on the recommendations that are set out there. Are colleagues happy to support those recommendations? Okay, so we have dissent. Okay, can I see those who are in favour of those recommendations, please? Can I see those colleagues who are against? And we have no abstentions. Okay, thank you.
What was the result?
7 votes for, 5 votes against. Thank you, Tom and Peter.
Just formally agree to extend.
Okay, we're going to have to formally agree to extend the meeting. Just if we can just adjourn for 30 seconds, please. 23-24 Q3 budget monitoring report. Thank you for your patience, Jane and Philip. If you could just introduce yourself briefly and then introduce the report very briefly, that would be great. Thank you.
I'm Philip Gregory, Director of Finance and Commercial Services.
I'm Jane Wilby, Head of Accounting. Thank you, Chair. The paper gives an update on the Q3 budget monitoring position for 23-24 for the General Fund. The paper will be taken to the full paper goes to the Finance Committee next week, and each policy committee gets a tailored version for their committee budgets over the next few weeks. So the headlines at Q3 is we're forecasting an overspend in the General Fund of 16.7 million against a net revenue budget of 493 million, which is a 3.4% variance to budget. The movement between Q2 that was presented to committee in December is about 700,000. So we forecasted an overspend of 17.4 in December. So the movement between quarters is not huge, but we did see a big adverse movement in the education, children and families budgets. And that was due to increased cost of placements and a risk around income at our in-house provision, Aldine House, plus further demand on our home to school transport of £500,000. This has been offset by some additional income in adults and underspends against budgets in youth services, improvements in commercial property budgets, and some further interest income from our cash balances. The 3 main areas of overspend for the council, as consistent with the reports throughout the year, is adult social care, children's social care, and homelessness. So in adults, the services continue to be challenged by increasing demand and inflating costs. But the recovery plan is in place, a continuation of strength-based reviews and solid partnership working with health partners and creative commissioning activities to reduce the package costs. In children's, we've got some big challenges from the ballooning cost of placements, which are caused by the limited supply, alongside a shortage of foster carers. We've got rising costs of home to school transport continuing, now supporting over 2,365 children in the city, which has increased by 1,000 in 4 years. And the homelessness situation, coupled with the shortage of affordable housing in the city, limited options, our use of hotel and bed and breakfast accommodation has reached an unsustainable level. We have now got the highest national homelessness level in the country for 20 years. In spite of these emerging challenges, we're currently on track to deliver 77% of our savings targets, with further 14% to be delivered next year. There is, however, an underlying pressure in our budgets of 28 million, which needs to be addressed. So we are offsetting some of this underlying problem with grants and provisions, which is providing some relief for those underlying challenges that need to be addressed in order to be sustainable going forwards. The majority of those issues come from the 3 key areas in adults, children's and homelessness. In the Strategy and Resources Committee, there's a 200,000 underspend. The key issue in the committee's budgets relates to the fact that we've got the housing benefits budget, which is for the supported exempt accommodation. So where accommodation is provided with care and support and is not with a registered provider, the council cannot fully reclaim the subsidy of housing benefit. So this is forecast to cost the council £3.5 million this year and is hitting councils nationally. Property and Regen have had, they've benefited through some one-off income for dilapidations from a previous tenant at Electric Works, but are still in an overspend position, but that's improved between the quarters. There's staffing overspends in General Council due to agency and locum costs to cover absences and vacancies. People and culture and business change are all also falling short of budget targets due to employee costs. So the national context really, we're not unique here in Sheffield. Councils across the country are experiencing the same challenges in the same context. The latest budget offered no solutions from central government for the pressures that we face, and we will have to take action at a local level to tackle these sticky issues. Sheffield City Council has been able to manage overspends against budget by drawing from reserves for the past 2 financial years, and will do so again this year. Of the 70 million budget contingency reserve that we set aside in 21, 13 million will remain by the end of the year given the current level of overspend. Given this challenging position and likely requirement in the next few years to draw on this reserve, a further 12.5 million has been identified from a one-off surplus from our collection fund. This was approved at full council on the 6th of March. Our medium-term financial analysis highlights a 61 million gap over the next 4 years. The good news is that we have balanced the budget for next year, and that was agreed at full council on the 6th of March, which provided the details of savings needed for next year. Whilst the targets are lower than previous years, we can't relax yet. We must continue to drive the delivery of budgets and tackle those in-year overspends and underlying issues to prevent the gap from widening. The committee is asked to note the position at quarter 3 for 23-24. The final position will be presented to the committees in June. So, Philip, would you like to add anything or invite questions from the committee?
Thank you. The only thing I'll add is, we've flagged the underlying budget position throughout the year, as well as the underlying sort of sticky issues. We will need to tackle those as Jane's set out. I think the key thing, though, is that we've started the planning approach for 2025, and we are working on an approach where we'll be using the council plan to help us prioritise budgets going forward. Open to questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Okay, so I think we passed a balanced budget last week, and as I said in the committee last week, as the council meeting, as did Councillor Naz, this is a good sign of the fact that we're prudently and responsibly managing our budgets to be able to get us to this position, but there can be no complacency. The challenges set out there, 28 billion core pressure sitting there that we have to deal with, and the council plan, another big milestone success of this year, gives us an opportunity to prioritise how we do our budgeting over the next period to really tackle that 28 billion, because as Jane rightly pointed out, the national budget offered us no hope and no additional support last week rather. It's been a long week. And so we'll take some questions if there are any, but I think with the emphasis on brief. Joe.
Thank you, Tom. Yes, I'll be brief. I just wanted to congratulate the fine officers in Waste and Street Scene for bringing that portfolio in, £1 million under budget. I do have a question regarding the budget for next year in terms of the extra money we've been allocated for tackling fly tipping and the expectation this will be raised by increased penalties for fly tipping. I did raise a concern during the full council meeting, as you remember, that those increases wouldn't necessarily raise that money. So I would like an assurance that, we've got that money to spend on fly tipping, whatever, because I think full council took the view that it would raise the money, and who are we to argue with the wisdom of full council, that we have that money to spend on whatever, and if it doesn't raise the money, indeed, if the higher penalties put off fly tipping, as we hope they will, and we raise less money, we can still spend that money on reducing fly tipping. Thank you.
Okay. Any other colleagues want to come in this part of the agenda? No. Philip, do you want to just address that point? Thank you.
Yeah. So
and Jane, sorry.
Yeah. Thank you. So we recognise that there's the budget amendment that was passed at full council. We need to work through the full implications of that in terms of the actual budget that will impact the Waste and Street Scene service for 24-25. Obviously, that will include an increased income budget, but the implication of that is that will then be matched by increased costs to support the waste and fly tipping service to ensure that fly tipping is reduced. But we'll work through with the service how that income budget changes and the associated increase in expenditure.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you from all of the committee for the work that you and colleagues have done to get us to this place today. So thank you very much. So we're asked to note the updated information in the report and duly noted. Thank you very much for sticking with us this afternoon. Item 13, Sheffield Growth Framework, Principles and Themes. And that is Kate Martin, who will be joining us. This is a report or discussion around the growth framework has been to various committees and boards over the last few weeks, so a number of colleagues are well aware of it. Kate, if you could briefly introduce yourself and then briefly introduce the report, that would be very helpful. Thank you. It's a sign.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Kate Martin, Exec Director for City Futures, here to present a report that you've got in front of you here today about the growth framework for the city. In relation to our process around the growth framework, the report sets out how the council has an ambition to develop a Sheffield growth plan for 2024 to 2035. And the purpose of this report is to set out the principles and themes for growth, which we're calling the growth framework, and then seek approval for 3 recommendations, including moving on to phase 2 of the work, which includes developing a full Sheffield growth plan and a detailed action plan that goes with that as well. In relation to the recommendations today, we're asking committee to consider and endorse 3 themes for growth, to approve the process, as I said, to move forward for phase 2, and to agree to receive a draft for further consideration of the growth plan in the summer of 2024. Before we move to those recommendations, it's just important to set out some of the context around the development of a Sheffield growth plan. Sheffield currently doesn't have a growth plan, and as a future-facing city, it's really important that we address this and align with other large UK cities, but also this recommendation was made to us also as part of the LGA Peer Challenge report and review, and the details of the recommendations from the LGA review are set out in 1.1.3 of this report as well. The growth plan will, once developed, align and help us and enable us in partnership to deliver the city goals that we have now endorsed as a council, and also help us to drive forward and deliver the priorities of the council plan around people, prosperity and planet as well. In relation to the delivery of the growth plan, it will align some of our existing work that we're doing around growth in partnership. It will build on some of the existing delivery partnerships at a local, at regional and national level as well, and it will set out some priorities for future investment, funding and inward support that the council may need to foster and develop growth for the future. It will also set a direction, helpfully, for the South Yorkshire Mayoral Combined Authority plan for growth about future regional devolved investment that Sheffield may wish to seek from the Mayoral Combined Authority. In relation to the report today, it sets out a 2-stage process. Because we currently don't have an existing plan, we are bringing this first stage report forward and seeking endorsement for the framework for growth, which includes principles for growth, which we will use in developing actions, partnerships and future projects and programmes for all new growth proposals moving forward. And these broadly include focusing on the city's uniqueness and our strengths as a city, being fair and prosperous to all and supporting all, working in partnership in particular with our communities, fostering a business base that helps local business, start-ups and scale-ups grow across the city, and also meeting our climate ambitions for the longer-term future. In relation to developing the growth framework that you have in front of you today, we have built on existing consultation and engagement over the last 12 to 18 months, including developing an economic evidence base to underpin the growth plan, building on the city goals engagement data and information that we have, the engagement that was across the city under statutory conditions around local plan, and also through a growth reference group of partners across the city who have also carried out some engagement around some of the themes. The report then sets out and recommends 3 themes for growth. 1, our economy, global, green and growing. 2, celebrating and growing a vibrant culture and creative Sheffield. And 3, growing our neighbourhoods together. And details of the proposed ambitions and areas of activity around the 3 themes are set out in subsections 1.4 throughout the report.
Thanks, Kate. I'm going to probably ask you to draw it to a close, if that's all right, just in the interest of time. Is there anything further you want?
No,
brilliant. Okay.
Just got to the end of my notes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Right, Councillor Johnson's indicated. Can I see, does anyone else want to come in? Councillor Williams, Councillor Miskell. Those 3, and then I'm not seeing anyone else. Okay, Councillor Johnson, and then Councillor Williams.
Thanks. Just to say I'm happy to support this. It's a sensible way forward to deal with this issue about what we're calling growth there. Noting it's not just sort of like rapacious profiteering in that sort of very narrow sense of economic growth. It's and the 5 principles set out at 1.3 seem to be fairly well rounded. We can probably develop more in about resilience in all aspects of what's done here, but that's part of the quite large amount of work to be done, so I'm happy to support that.
Thank you very much. Councillor Williams.
Yeah, I'll be brief, Chair. Thank you very much for the report. I really think this is a great way forward. My word of caution is, to paraphrase Douglas, growth for the sake of growth is not a good thing. It's got to be measured growth across the city. I'm particularly keen in your principles and themes and the fact that they don't get lost in the growth plan going forward. And I can't help myself, but I noticed above 1.5 on page 283, one of the points it talks about in your policies is considers our community assets and buildings to support district centres and community services and support. Thank you.
Just wanted to poke that hornet's nest a little bit more, Councillor Miskell.
I'm pleased to see Councillor Johnson supporting economic growth in the city. I guess over the years, the council hasn't had that plan for growth, and I think we would all recognise that this is a huge step forward, and what a huge step forward it will actually be. From all sides of the chamber, we all now recognise, and we're really clear that Sheffield is a city on the up. We see, don't we, outside this town hall, the regeneration that's happening in the city centre, the cranes that are going up, and with that in mind, those 5 principles for growth that are set out, I think in section 1.3, about how we can bring about fair and inclusive growth for the city to lift people out of poverty, to build communities and to improve our cultural sector and to deal with the climate emergency are really important. Particularly pleased to see that the plan, once adopted, will be taken out across the UK on roadshows to publicise our city, which sits very much with the LGA peer review, which we have got later on covering in the agenda on item 15, I think. But I think as part of that kind of wider roadshow of taking out Sheffield to the rest of the UK, I'd be really interested to know whether actually we've mentioned this report, how important it is that we're bringing together all sectors, that we're speaking with one voice to attract inward investment, but will different representatives from different sectors across this city be joining us in order to amplify our voice and plan for growth in this city.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Miscall. Kate, any brief remarks?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the comments in particular about the resilience. Yes, we can build that in, and we'll build that into the fuller report, an important point to make about our growth and sustained growth there. So thank you for that. I think also thank you for the comments and feedback around the measurements and outcomes. They will be important about how we deliver is as important as what we deliver. So thank you, and we'll take that back as well. In relation to the amplifying of the roadshow, certainly through the City Goals work, through the Growth Reference Group, there's a willingness of many partners across the city to share and talk about the opportunities, growth and the longer term future for the city. And so I would hope that those partners will join us through the growth plan to amplify that.
Thank you very much, Kate. So we've got a number of recommendations before us to consider and endorse the principles and themes for growth set out in the report, to approve the process set out for developing the growth plan, and to agree to receive and consider the draft growth plan in late summer. Are people happy to support those recommendations? Excellent, great. Thank you all very much. Thank you, Kate, and thank you to the team for the work that's been done to get us to this point. Item number 14 is the new flag protocol. And we'll welcome back James to the hot seat. Okay, James, the flag protocol is something that's been developed over the last few months. Colleagues have obviously had a chance to take a look at it. Is there anything particular you would like to highlight today to just draw attention to? Otherwise, in which case, I'll move straight to discussion.
Nothing specific. I think, well, hopefully the report is clear in terms of what it's trying to set out. And I think this provides a significantly enhanced process, particularly I suppose to draw the committee's attention to the decision-making guidance around ad hoc requests to fly flags, which I think is the key aspect of the report.
That's right, and I referred to that earlier on in my question response earlier on about the clarity that's now there, set out, a very clear process for decision-making around ad hoc requests for flag flying. Are there any members who would like to come in on this? I've got Councillor Agenzio and Councillor Agenzio.
Just very quickly, thank you very much for the work that's gone on this. You know, obviously we've discussed it when we had the briefing. Just to reiterate something that was said before by one of the questioners, the fact that unfortunately not all flags are the same. So I think there is kind of an element of, you know, equality. You know, it's not as easy to fly certain flags compared to others. But also, I'll ask this again, the commemorative flags, it really irks me. I would like to know why we have a Merchant Navy Day on the 3rd of September and can we get rid of it? Thank you.
Okay.
As Sheffield is landlocked.
Yeah. Yes, also with quite a proud history of people serving from this city in the Royal Navy with a famous ship named after this city. Yes, James, I don't know if you want to particularly make reference to the Merchant Navy point.
I believe it was a resolution of full council some years ago as the reason as to why that day is in the flag protocol. I mean, if the committee wishes us to review it, we can do.
I'm going to put that question directly to Councillor Agenzio. Is that a motion to remove that? Are you asking to amend the report? Because I'm not so far seeing any other support. Okay, in which case then, I'm not seeing anyone else who wants to come in, and I'm going to move us straight through to the recommendations, which is to adopt the protocol for flying the flags at Sheffield City Council sites and other commemorative activity as set out, and to delegate authority to the Chief Exec in consultation with the Chair of this committee to make decisions on ad hoc requests to fly particular flags in line with protocol. People happy with that? Thank you very much indeed. Item number 15 is the LGA, thank you James, Corporate Peer Challenge Progress Review Report. And we are joined by Kate Josephs. Kate, do you want to briefly introduce the report?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Members will recall that in late 2022, we invited the LGA, I think for the first time in Sheffield, and a team of member and officer peers from other local authorities to carry out our very first corporate peer challenge. We published the LGA's report and our action plan and report to this committee in March 2023. That was a really important demonstration of the improvement journey we're on as an organisation, inviting external, independent challenge to further our progress and ensure we're firmly focused on delivering for the people of this city. In December last year, the LGA peer team returned to check on our progress, and I would like to put on record our thanks to the member and officer peers, along with colleagues from the LGA, for their insight and support during the time that they spent with us in December. This report provides the committee with the LGA's findings from the progress review, and the report's appended into the progress review is appended to the report. I'm really proud to say that the feedback reflects the very hard work and dedication that members and officers have undertaken together in the last year to drive our improvement. In particular, the LGA's report recognises our strategic ambition, collaborating with partners to develop our city goals and setting out a positive and focused council plan, which the full council approved last week, that provides a strategic framework for everything we will do. Our robust financial management was called out, improving our delivery against budget savings and BIPs, and setting out a 4-year MS that is aligned to our council plan, as colleagues have discussed earlier in this afternoon's agenda. They praised our ambitious leadership and governance maturity, recognising how members of all parties have worked together over this last year within our increasingly embedded committee model. And they also praised, and this speaks directly to the report that Kate Martin brought a few items ago, to our increasing confidence, working hard to make sure that Sheffield punches its way externally, nationally, globally as an open, collaborative partner, one with a bold vision for the city's growth and prosperity and for the way we work with our communities. These are really strong foundations to build from, and I think we must take confidence from the LGA's positive assessment as we work hard to build on the progress we've made together. Obviously, that means that we need to fully work on embedding the council plan in our organisation, establishing an outcome-based budget, robust performance framework, which we'll be coming back to in our next meeting, and taking a relentless approach to service quality for our customers. We obviously must not and will not be complacent. In particular, the LGA team suggested we need to continue to develop our approach to citizen involvement, continuing the strides we've made on equality, diversity and inclusion, and building from the new equality framework that members have considered earlier in the agenda today. So I think it's important that we take some time at the end of this meeting, a long meeting, to celebrate the progress we've made. Also, we're asking members to agree to the final recommendation that we would invite the LGA team back to Sheffield in 2028. By then, I and all of the senior team on the officer side want us to be and believe that we can be showcasing a council that is one of the best in the country, that has delivered this council plan, is well on with producing its next one, that reflects and respects its communities, involving them and engaging them in everything we do, and that's trusted to deliver for the city. And I think in particular, I just want to call out one of the points that the LGA peer review team made when they came back in December, which was recognising that we've done a lot of work collectively, officers and members together, to get the foundations right, to take hard decisions, to move pieces of work forward that have not been moved forward for a long time, the council plan being a really important example of that. Recommendations are fairly straightforward. Happy to take comments or questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kate. Let me just add my thanks to the senior colleagues here and the members of this committee for the joint work that we've done over the last year, which is reflected in this positive report. And I was particularly pleased to see that the recognition that the council was more confident, more optimistic, and a positive place compared to what it was a couple of years ago. And I think we are all, seeing that. But it's nice to see external validation of the work that's gone on. But I completely endorse the Chief Executive's point that this is no time to be complacent. Lots has been done. There's an awful lot more to do. And this improvement journey is very much underway, but there's a long way to go yet. Any other comments, questions from anyone? Councillor Johnson.
Just briefly to echo that, it's reassuring to know that we're in a good place and it's not just ourselves saying it. So again, thanks particularly to Kate for leading off this process.
Councillor Bacon.
Just to concur, I think it's marvellous how we've got forward. I think there's some people we should particularly thank, but perhaps not appropriate now. And we can go forward, hopefully, as a better team. I don't think it's, in the number of years I've been involved in politics in this city, I don't think I've ever used the word team before. So I think we're still at the foundation stages, but we're getting there. And thank you very much.
Thank you. I think we all would concur. We're at the foundation stage, but we're putting down really strong foundations to allow us to build on this and make sure we continue to improve as a council. Okay, so a number of recommendations which, as Kate said, are fairly straightforward, I think, to welcome the report, to thank the members of the OGA team, to recognise that we've all put in a lot of collective effort to get us to this point, that we should continue on the improvement journey, and that we commit to to ask the OGA to come back and do another challenge within the usual timescale, probably in 2028. Are people happy to support that? Excellent. Thank you very much, everybody. That has been a very long meeting and I'm conscious of the time, so thank you all for your patience today. We got through a lot and see you all again soon. Thank you.